This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got some favourite themes. You know I have. Footballification. The queue for the ghost train is always much longer than the queue for the speak your weight machine. There's no point having a mind if you never change it. All of these things that I use in a way to try to unlock things that are not immediately unlockable or comprehensible. The pendulum is one of my favourites. I think I discovered it, oddly, talking about a topic that is similar to the one that we're going to begin with today. Because we're going to talk about bin strikes. We're not going to do what I would do were I presenting a slightly more frivolous programme or working for a slightly less serious radio station, which is, can you guess what the topic would be if we were, if it was 12 o'clock on a Friday? Can you guess what the topic would be on this side? Yeah, you're absolutely right. What's the biggest rat you've ever seen? 0345. No, stop! It's a joke. I don't want to do that. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. I turn my attention to industrial action because when I say to you, what is going on? When I say to you, what is your view of bin workers going on strike? I think that the reaction can sometimes be they're exercising a right that I don't have, and therefore I disapprove. So I've got the memory in the back of my mind about pensions, oddly. I think many, many moons ago when I first started being asked what my opinions were on broadcast media, I remember sitting there with someone who was sort of a vague pal of mine at the time, and she went absolutely tonto about public sector pensions. And I know for a fact that the newspaper that she was working for at the time had an extremely generous pension provision, but we were in an era where increasingly, if you were in the private sector, you would not have a pension. You know, it would either be something that you had to take care of yourself independently. You wouldn't have a workplace pension. And the industrial action, or even just the conversation that the country was having, was about whether or not people in the public sector, it was firefighters, I think, firefighters who were taking industrial action in some way to protect the terms and conditions that they had signed up to when they started the job. So retirement age pension provision, it shouldn't have been controversial, really. If you sign up to something in 1984 and you're due to retire in 2020 or whatever, then you should be able to expect the terms and conditions that you agreed to when you began your lengthy career, particularly in the public sector, which is often akin to vocational, isn't it? And I remember hearing her go after the people in the public sector who had decent pensions on the grounds that lots of people in the private sector didn't anymore. These are really interesting moments, you know, when it comes to developing political opinions. It's a weird job, this, right? It's very weird to be, and I don't do anything really anymore except talk to you every morning. I don't accept invitations to go on other programs. I'm too much of an egotist. If I'm not in charge, I'm not interested. But the first few times you do it, it's really strange. Why are you asking me? I don't know. Ask my dad. My dad knows what he's talking about, I would think in the back of my mind, and then I'd ring him after coming off air and he'd prove it. You know, why are you asking me what I think about this? But what I have found over the years, and what I found in the earliest years, is that the more you listened to other people, the more you could form your own sincere and authentic opinions, often in relief to what they were saying, often in opposition to what they were saying. So I remember sitting there listening to this woman. I won't tell you who it was. It would be unfair, but goodness knows in the UK media there's 200 to choose from. Citing the argument that public sector gets it easy and they shouldn't be able to go on strike, and why do they get nice pensions when you don't? They did, the people saying it, but you, the person they're trying to appeal to, doesn't. And I remember sitting there. I remember the exact moment when the penny dropped. And because I said it out loud, this is what I mean about it being a weird job. And it's going to work for you, career-wise, if you have moments like this, if you have interesting thoughts that are not sparklingly original, but sound good in the moment and you're capable of expressing yourself. I just said, you sound like somebody who got mugged last night and won't be happy until everybody else has been mugged as well. And that is a position that I find being repeated almost daily in the 25 years since, by right-wing media. Well, I haven't got that, so why should you? To which the response should have been, but you should have it. It should never have been taken away from you. Whether it's your workplace rights, whether it's your pension provision, whether it's your ability to take action when you're being exploited by an employer. It shouldn't matter who you are or who the employer is. We should all enjoy certain rights. The trade union movement, blood, sweat and tears to secure for workers liberation from the days when kids were sent up chimneys or sent to work in the mills, where if you lost your arm, you essentially lost your livelihood, where you were expected to put in 6 or 7 day weeks, working from dawn till dusk. The idea that the human being was merely an engine through which the owning class could become ever wealthier has only been challenged by the trade union movement. I'm not being dewy-eyed about it. I'm not being, what's the word that I want? Naive. But these things didn't happen by accident. And the alternative, a union-free culture, is one where workers have no rights. To which the right-wing columnist responds by saying, well, someone over there has got no rights, so why should you have any? And if that person being appealed to is not really thinking about things very deeply, or is so cross and twisted and bitter about their own meagre lot, they can be persuaded that they will feel better if somebody else gets hurt. It happens everywhere. It's the absolute crux of the immigration debate. It's everything Donald Trump stands for. You as a voter will feel better if the person you vote for hurts someone else. We've given up, it sometimes seems, on actually expecting politicians to promise to improve our lives. We just now seem to focus all of our attention on politicians who are simply promising to make other people's lives worse. Some of the stuff coming out of the Oval Office now with regards to deportations is... I've already used the word fascist correctly, but I don't know what the next stage is, what comes after fascism. I don't know. But it's simply a promise to make somebody else's life. Vote for me and I'll hurt her. Vote for me and I'll hurt him. Vote for me and I'll hurt all of them, all of them, all of the Venezuelans, all of the Cubans. Vote for me and I'll hurt all of the refugees, all of the Muslims, all of the people of colour. You vote for me and I'll hurt them, or the travellers. I'll tell you what, I'll really hurt the travellers, the travelling community, the transgender. You vote for me, I'll really hurt the gays. I mean, it is happening around the world. One of the great lessons of the last few years is that none of these victories are permanent. I know what you're thinking. What the hell has this got to do with bins and rats, James? You were thinking that, weren't you? That's okay. It's obvious, I hope, because what is happening in Birmingham, I haven't talked about it previously. Tom Swarbrick's been doing great work in this field on the Drive Time show. He even went to Birmingham, which is quite brave. And I say that as someone who grew up there or just down the road in Kidderminster. You know what Jane Austen said about Birmingham, don't you? She said, I think in a letter, not a novel, she said, one has no great hopes from Birmingham. There is something direful in the sound. That's the only place in the whole of British literature that I've ever found the word direful. D-I-R-E-F-U-L. I'm sure she said that. One has no great hopes from Birmingham. There is always something direful in the sound. And there is. And then the accent. But that's not what we're talking about today. Workers got balloted yesterday. And they rejected it in terms. The union said that members had voted overwhelmingly against a, quote, totally inadequate offer. And I'm afraid that I haven't paid as much attention to it as perhaps I should have done. Because I started digging into it a little bit last night, and I found myself thinking, look, I want my bins emptied, right? Everybody wants their bins emptied. It's bin day tomorrow, actually. Don't let me forget, whatever you do. And it's the garden bin, which is quite a relief because I've been mowing the lawn already this year and it's overflowing. But I digress. You want your bins emptied, right? Nobody doesn't want their bins emptied. What do you want? Piles of rubbish. When do you want them? Now. But what would you do, seriously, if your employer came into the room now and said to you that they were cutting your wages? Okay, let's go a little bit further. They were sacking some of your colleagues and you genuinely felt, A, that wasn't fair, and B, it was possible that the ability to do the job would be fatally compromised by some of these redundancies. But fundamentally, let's just focus on the pay cut. There is a little bit of dispute. The problem that the council has got in Birmingham is that they have fluffed up absolutely everything for years. So the idea that they've suddenly achieved levels of genius that means their every utterance must be trusted and believed is a little bit fanciful. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two poles. So you have the union saying that some workers, and unspecified numbers of workers, could be facing an £8,000 a year pay cut. And the council counters by claiming that only 17 workers will be affected. But that's 17 workers. They're emptying the bins. It's not necessarily a... what's the word that I want? It's not necessarily a profession that you immediately think of as being comfortable and pleasurable. So what would you do? Ant's already been in touch. He says, I would refuse to work. You're not on megabucks, right? If you've got a good settlement, nothing seems to boil the urine more of lazy old right-wing men than people in the public sector earning decent wages. Train drivers are like kryptonite for a certain kind of lazy gammon. You got a train driver on a decent scratch, and some people who are on 10 times as much are absolutely livid, as if the working class isn't entitled to a salary that allows them, for example, to live in the southeast, or possibly even attend the same sporting events as the columnists and commentators foaming at the mouth over the idea of a train driver being on a decent whack. Don't mention the profits made by the train companies, or the dividends taken out by the shareholders, or the salaries secured by the chief executives and the management. For God's sake, don't mention any of that. Just go after the ordinary drivers. What would you do? What would you do if your employer said, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut your wages? Now, I don't know what I would do. I would need to hear an explanation, and in this case it would involve Birmingham City Council saying we simply can't afford it. To which my response would be, well, I simply can't afford it either. I simply can't afford a pay cut either. So what would you do? And that is why I don't think, glancing at my screen, I don't think I can confine the conversation initially to Birmingham, as in people in Birmingham. Because who else really matters when you think about it than the people who have had thousands of tons of rubbish accruing on their streets? I read that it is now being cleared up at a rate of knots. 1,500 tons of waste being cleared up every day. 120 refuse collection vehicles now on the road, hitting 15 of the worst affected wards. I know that it has been a regional problem, as opposed to, by which I mean regions of Birmingham, as opposed to a citywide problem. But the headlines don't reflect that. The headlines say Birmingham. They don't say Bourneville. They say Birmingham. So you think you're going to hop off the train at New Street Station or Moore Street Station or Snow Hill Station and suddenly be engulfed by a tsunami of rubbish bags and rats. I don't think that you are. But you're going to know about it. You're going to know that bin workers, refuse workers in Birmingham, are on a strike that has made the city international news. Are you going to know that they are on a strike designed to resist demands that they accept pay cuts from their employer, pay cuts from their council? And if your answer to the question of what would you do if your boss told you they were cutting your wages is the same as Ant's and others, if your answer was, I would refuse to work, then you support the refuse workers in Birmingham. And here's the thing that I have thought many times over the years, doing this job, ploughing sometimes a lonely furrow, paddling a lonely canoe, often up the creek, sometimes without a paddle. I think the British public is rather better than the right-wing media gives us credit for. I think that if you were genuinely asked and in possession of all the facts, whether or not you support refuse workers going on strike because they cannot countenance an actual pay cut, what happens if they accept this one today? What happens tomorrow? I think you'd probably be supportive. And unless there's someone else pouring poison in your ear about the fact that you don't have the right to strike, you don't have collective bargaining in your armoury, you don't have any recourse really in the event of your employer trying to change the terms of your employment. You might be on a 0 hours contract. You might be working in circumstances that render you almost without any rights at all. So unless you've got someone pouring in your ear poison of the kind that says, why should they have that? You haven't got it. You got me in your other ear saying you bloody well should have it. And until we pull our socks up and start acting like grown-ups in this country, you're never going to have it, because we're all so busy biting chunks out of each other. It's just the bin men's turn this week. It's just the refuse workers this week. I've only just noticed Ant's joke. I wondered why he'd put refuse in capital letters. I would refuse to work. Get it? Well done, Ant. Sorry that took me so long to spot. So, do you support the strikers? And remember, if you are somebody who always supports the strikers or always opposes strikes, how can I say this politely? You're probably listening to the wrong programme. There'll be some strikes that a properly functioning brain will conclude are unjustified, and some strikes that a properly functioning brain will conclude are justified. If you suffer from footballification, if your politics is not about thinking and understanding, but is simply about grabbing a flag and waving it as violently as you can in one direction or the other, then this conversation doesn't really have much meaning for you. So, top of the list if you're in Birmingham. Do you support the strikers? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Top of the list if you're in Birmingham. And then for the rest of us, it is just obvious, isn't it? That if they are threatening to take away some of your income, you take away your labour to stop them from doing so. And if they say we can't afford it, you say, well, I can't afford it either. And I've got no control over running the council, but I've got control over running my life. And I'm not going to work until you agree to carry on paying me what you're currently paying me. I'm not even after a pay rise. How much of this has been properly reflected in the coverage? I'm not even after a pay rise. I just want to carry on earning what I'm currently on. Are you with them or against them? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 10:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10. According to the lead officer of Unite, the union, 97% of those who voted rejected the council's deal on a 60% turnout. So even, I think, post-Tory government attempts to rig the system to make it almost impossible to go on strike, or considerably harder than it used to be, that's irresistible. And their argument is, the General Secretary, Sharon Graham, says for weeks these workers have faced attacks from government and their employer, pushing the lie that only a handful of workers are affected by the council's plans to cut pay by up to £8,000. 97% on a 60% turnout does either speak of extraordinary solidarity among the refuse workers of Birmingham, or a widespread belief that more than 17 people, which is the council's claim, will be affected. So how can you not support them unless you're prepared to take a pay cut tomorrow just because your boss says you have to? Alan's in Liverpool. Alan, what would you like to say?
Good morning, young James. Just to give you my background, I've been a trade unionist for 40 years, and my union, the Communication Workers Union, CW, fully support this strike, and I can guarantee you that virtually all the unions in the UK will support this strike. And the point I wanted to make was the pandemic really showed the country who are the essential workers.
Yes.
While the CEOs and the executives were hiding behind their curtains, it was these people on the streets. And I would ask, if I could, the Birmingham City leader, how are their refuge collectors, their workers, able to take that kind of cut during the cost of living, the higher mortgage? It's just absolutely, it's unbelievable.
Well, listen, I'm not to split hairs, but there's rather good news on the mortgage front this morning, and also rather good news on average wages going up by about 5% year on year. But I take your central point. Your wages aren't going up 5% year on year if you're a bin man in Birmingham. They're about to be cut. And what is the dichotomy? You must know. You must come up against this much more often than I do. The fact that people who don't have recourse to industrial action have been so easily persuaded to hate on people who do. It's so counterintuitive, isn't it? It's so self-defeating. But here is a section of the workforce that has the ability to withdraw its labour, the only tool ultimately that the working man and woman has, and a tool that has been stolen from them in so many places or never given to them in so many other areas of the workforce. Where does the ill will come from when we're talking about people who don't have the right to withdraw their labour?
Well, as a trade unionist, yeah. I would say that every worker should be in a union, and instead of criticising people who are able to defend themselves in the workplace. They should be joining a union. Now, I would recommend that all workers in the UK try and join a union, because we have seen over the last 14 years the attack on trade union rights.
Yes.
And this Labour Party and my trade union CW was fundamental in the New Deal for workers. But when we have, and I will call them rogue bosses who think they can get away with it, and then the people, the workforce who stand up and say, no, we can't afford this, or it's wrong, or it's right. Every trade union and every worker, doesn't matter where you are, because remember the pandemic, the shop workers were out, my members were out, the bin collectors were out, everybody who was essential were working. But these people who was, as I said, hiding behind their curtains during the pandemic, didn't want to catch the virus.
That's an interesting point. That's a really interesting point. They were not out there getting their hands dirty, so to speak. Where does the road lead? Do you think this is damaging for central government? Do you feel that a Labour government could have done more? It's a Labour council, obviously, so it's a Labour problem. But do you think that the central government should and could have done more on this?
Yes, I do. As I said to you before, the CW, my union, was fundamental in the New Deal for workers, and to repeal some of the anti-trade union laws set by the previous Tory governments. But I was surprised at Angela Rayner telling the workforce to get back to work when we are the party of the workers.
And she's a former trade union officer herself, of course, so you'd think there might be a little bit more solidarity there. Timidity is a word you're going to hear me using a lot to describe this government in the coming days and weeks, and it's a timidity born of many things, but a fear of being associated with the trade union actions of the 1970s perhaps underpinned some of it, no matter that most voters weren't alive, or many voters weren't alive. Most voters can't remember. There's a brilliant piece, I think I told you on Friday, in The Economist under the Badgett column about how all the parties seem to be chasing a constituency of people that is dwindling all the time because people in that demographic are dying. But I suppose elements of the media are still full of dinosaurs wanging on about bin strikes from the 1970s, and maybe people in government, people in Westminster listen too much to those dinosaurs. I don't know. I'd rather listen to Alan. Or indeed Hamlet. Not that one, this one. It's about drawing a line, James, in the sand, James, as much as anything. It may only be 17 workers today. The union disputes that. But what about tomorrow? We can't take one step back against any drive to take away the rights and pay of the worker. If you can't pay for the service, don't be surprised if it gets taken away from you. Fair pay for fair work. What a wonderful soliloquy from Hamlet. Darren is in High Wycombe. Darren, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
My question for this would be, the people that are making this decision to reduce people's wages by £8,000, would they be prepared to take the same cut?
Oh, I should know the answer to that, shouldn't I? Because it could be, it could be yes. It could be that they have agreed a round of pay cuts in order to acknowledge the strains and stresses caused by the bank.
I very much doubt it.
Yeah, because we need to pay this money to get good people, you see, and if we don't pay that money to get good people, then they'll go and run other councils.
Men are worth less because they're not good people.
Yes.
Is that what
that seems to be the subtext of where this rhetoric leads us. And I don't know whether there's a massive sort of sleight of hand going on here, because I think we might both run the risk of sounding a little bit daft if we were to say something like, how hard can it be to run a council? But equally, how hard can it be to be on the bins? I suspect both are quite difficult in their very different ways.
To be fair, would anybody really want? It's not a job that you want to do, is it? It's not something you aspire to, emptying bins of people's rubbish all day, 5 to 6 days a week. No, it's not an attractive job, is it?
No, so I think it's oddly satisfying.
To get people, they've got to pay a decent wage.
You would have thought so, wouldn't you? And the simple principle of I'm not taking a pay cut. If you're going on strike for a very generous pay rise, whether you deserve it or not, and I guess the most obvious example would be the junior doctors trying to bring themselves back up to parity, back up to where they would have been before 14 years of Tory rule. But it was quite a big leap from where they'd ended up. That is morally different, certainly politically different, than resisting a pay rise, seeking a pay rise, resisting a pay cut. I think are two different things. I don't think they should be reported in the same way. It's 10:30. I think I stunned Darren into silence. Here is Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. The dispute surrounds a decision to cut rolls, which the union says will leave a number of workers with an £8,000 a year pay cut. The council rejects this figure and insists that only 17 workers will be affected. All right, well, let's take the council at their word. And let's take the union at their word as well on different issues. So let's let the union set the figure of £8,000 a year, and let's let the council set the figure of how many workers are affected. So that means this is a strike in the council's eyes, about 17 workers being asked to accept a maximum of £8,000 a year reduction in pay, which adds up to £136,000 per year. And they're justifying it as being part of a necessary £300 million worth of cuts necessitated by their de facto bankruptcy of a couple of years ago. So even that, as No Hostages points out, they've done the maths for me, even that doesn't really make sense, does it? The council are correct, and it's only 17 workers, and they dispute the 8,000 per worker figure as being too high, but let's just say it is that high for the sake of argument. It's £136,000 per year. How much does the strike already cost? And why should the ordinary workers take the pay cut when the rationale for the council is that we can't afford it, but you can? 10:34 is the time. Peter is in Birmingham. Peter, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm retired now, but I did used to work for the City Council for 25 years, and I'm a council taxpayer to the council at the moment. And I am sympathetic to the strikers, but I'm also sympathetic to the City Council that needs to modernise. And surely an industry, a business, or even a service like the City Council, in introducing sort of new technological improvements, has the right to modernise and reorganise its service, particularly when it comes to change that's a national standard.
How is reducing a bin man's pay modernising his working practices?
Well, the point I'd like to make is that the grade 3 operatives have been offered redeployment at pay protection, rather. And I've heard service managers, councillors...
Well, can't have it both ways. Either people are being affected, and there's an argument over how many, but even the council concedes that 17 workers will be affected, and they may have been offered alternative jobs, but they don't necessarily want alternative jobs. They want to carry on doing the job that they're doing now. I've never met anyone in Birmingham, Peter, perhaps you have, who thinks their bins are emptied too often. So I'll just ask you again how a reduction in wages constitutes modernisation.
Well, if they take redeployment, I know people may not want it, but sometimes people have to make hard choices. But pay is being protected. Is a
5.7% pay rise a hard choice? Because that's what the councillors have just voted to give themselves.
Well, I think you're trying to change it onto another subject.
I'm absolutely not. I'm just wondering who has to make the hard choices, the bin men or the council workers? The council workers or the council laws. The council laws have just given themselves a 5.7% increase on their own allowance.
Yeah, but I think it's a mischievous false argument that you're proposing there, James.
Oh, tell me why.
Because whataboutism is not relevant. It's not helpful to the situation to try and resolve. So
the council is the employer.
Correct.
And the councillors have given themselves a pay rise.
Well, the council
while demanding that
body
go on.
on the pay body.
No, of course.
They
voted. They voted in February to give themselves a pay rise. During a full council meeting on January the 28th, a motion to increase the basic rate for all 101 councillors was passed unanimously.
Well, I stand corrected then, James.
That's all right. Well, best not accuse me of whataboutery then until you've got all your ducks in a row. Because I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just asking why the hard choices should be taken by the bin men and not by the councillors.
Well, the simple fact that they are the employer, the actual city council, and if they want to modernise the service to try and reduce the...
And then we're back to how is a pay cut an example of modernisation? But, I mean, I think you realise how deep the hole you've dug is, because you're talking about hard choices. The councillors actually had a choice about what happens to their allowances, and they voted to increase them. The refuse workers are being told they have no choice but to accept a cut. All they can do is withdraw their labour, but they've done. And you're somehow in favour of hard choices.
Well, no, I believe personally that the actual remuneration the councillor gets is too low. So I agree that their salary should have been increased.
And the bin men get too much?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying...
Well, you're in favour of a pay cut for them.
No,
What was your job at the council?
Sorry?
What was your job at the council?
What's that got to do with it?
Well, I think it might be really relevant. I think it might be really relevant.
I worked for Birmingham City Council for 25 years, from the lower tiers to a middle tier.
Yeah.
So I've experienced it. I've experienced the equal pay situation that the Set Council has gone through, and currently...
So more pay for councillors, less pay for refuse workers, in a nutshell.
Well, yeah, I think you've been argumentative there, James.
Well, tell me what I've got wrong about what your contribution contains.
Well, my contribution contains is the fact that the grade 3 operatives have been offered pay protection, and that's been reinforced by all levels of politicians. And if the service has got the right to modernise, that people have to make choices and take.
There you go.
Yeah, so less job within the council.
More pay for councillors, less pay for refuse workers. Then,
if you want to simplistically put it like that, fine.
Well, how would you put it?
I would put it that the actual bin strikers should basically return to work, take the offer of redeployment, maintain and protect their salary by doing different roles.
But even the council says that 17 workers will be affected. We can argue over how many. I don't think, Peter, respectfully, you can use your employment by Birmingham City Council as a qualification for contributing to the conversation without telling us exactly what you did, because there are sides being drawn here. And on one side, people are in favour of councillors getting an increase in their income. And on the same side, they seem to be in favour of refuse workers getting a decrease in their income. And I think the motivation for being in that position is pertinent. But I'm sorry that you feel that was too intrusive a question. 10:40 is the time. Andy is in Shrewsbury. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, just a couple of things from my own experience, really. When I was made redundant in 2009 and I'd seen it coming, took my HGV test and ended up, after taking redundancy, driving bin wagons.
Yeah.
And I did that for just barely above the minimum wage. But we did get to a position where there was only one role available, and I knew there was a guy who was in much worse of a state than I was, and I insisted that they took him on instead of me, which was no great shakes, because I knew I could afford to get by.
It's still an act of decency. I think you highlight something else that we need to recognise, and nobody likes bills. Nobody not many people vote to have their own taxes increased, but whether it's council tax or income tax. But there is a widespread perception that the country is on its knees. I was in Ireland at the weekend, and it took me a couple of days to notice what was bubbling away under the surface of my consciousness. And it was just little things, like the state of the roads not being full of potholes and being generally quite tidy. I was in Dublin, Wicklow and Wexford, so I wasn't confined to just one locale. And there was just an air of positivity and modernity that I think has been lacking from this country since the middle of austerity. And nobody thinks that the general well-being of a country is improved by reducing the provision of refuse removal. And yet that's what you've described. It's like the paring knife, isn't it? Just slicing bits off from the areas that are least able to fight back, or from financial pots that are least likely to have a finger of a plutocrat in them, or someone slicing a dividend off the top. And it's the ordinary people who suffer from reduced provision of public services.
I think as well, something that maybe the general public don't realise, and I didn't realise until I was having my training to drive these vehicles, was that it is actually statistically, it's one of the most dangerous jobs you can have in the country. There are more injuries associated with it than many, many other roles because of the risk factor of having people moving and walking around a moving vehicle. It's very dangerous. And, they earn their money. And I had my own opinions about what sort of a role refuse collection was at the time before I started doing it, but I soon realised it's a tough job. And there's a reality here which is scary to me, is that I'm with these guys in Birmingham on it, but I could see, my understanding is that the refuse in Birmingham is run by the city council, whereas in many other areas of the country, it's been outsourced to agencies. And the first thing they do is they just make everybody redundant, offer them a contract at the minimum wage, and carry on from there. And I do sincerely hope we're not heading that way with this.
Well, yeah, and that is, of course, the dream of some people, both working for councils and, of course, seeking to steer the national conversation. And you don't know, in the words of Joni Mitchell, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. Quite a few people pointing out that the pay protection that Peter referred to, our caller from Birmingham, is only for 2 years. So not quite necessarily the panacea that it was presented as. I'll read you this from Richard before we go to Joy, who's also in Birmingham. As an ex-soldier, this is really honest, Richard, and I really like this. As an ex-soldier, he writes, I used to be firmly against the right to strike, purely out of spite. Coming from a background where duty and discipline are drilled into you, I couldn't understand why anyone would walk out on their job. But since leaving the forces and working in the public sector, and more importantly joining a union, I've had a complete shift in perspective. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I now fully understand and appreciate the power of the collective. It frustrates me how the press often frames strike action as worker versus worker. Bin strikes like the one in Birmingham aren't about laziness or causing inconvenience. They're about fair treatment. But the narrative always seems designed to divide ordinary people rather than focus on the root causes or the failings of those in charge. And that's from Rich, who's just up the road from Birmingham in Dudley. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's always unhelpful, isn't it, when there is dispute over detail. And of course, the nature of negotiations is such that all of the information can't be made publicly available, unfortunately. But I do find that it is sometimes more helpful to go. I've told you this a few times since Brexit. It's happening now in the United States as well, where Wired and Rolling Stone are proving to be more reliable media than some of the more household name news providers. But I find trade mags, whether it's the Grocer for stuff about imports and exports, or on this occasion, Personnel Today, some of the best journalism, and in the arena of health as well. Some of the best journalism is done by the hardcore specialists. The post office scandal only came about, the lid only got blown off that as a consequence of journalism being done at Computer Weekly. But Personnel Today has more detail in it than many other stories, and it is to them that you have to turn to discover that 97% of voters on a 60% turnout rejected the deal offered by the council, which suggests, but doesn't prove, that many of the arguments being made for why they should accept it are coming from people who don't fully understand what was on the table in the first place.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the vexed question of whether or not the industrial action being taken by refuse workers in Birmingham is generally supported in Birmingham is not conclusively answered, but I suspect that there is broader support when you stop to think about the major issues for collective bargaining in general, withdrawal of labour in particular, and resistance of imposed pay cuts, especially, than much of the coverage, not all, but much of the coverage should and would allow. Ollie just takes up briefly that point I made about Ireland. When you spoke about Ireland a moment ago, you're right, there is a positive mood. In the last few years, we've got free school books, free warm meals in schools, 2 years of free preschool, fibre broadband in every house, and the list goes on. I don't want to idealise anywhere I don't live, anywhere I don't have full knowledge and understanding of, but there was also that election last year which was supposed to be all about immigration and then wasn't. Almost as if Twitter is not real life, and carefully stoked and provoked and cultivated culture wars or racist provocations on Elon Musk's sewer turned out in Ireland not to have any traction at all. Probably because of the points that Ollie makes, that the population is generally more comfortable than we are currently, and therefore much less susceptible to far-right lies and lazy othering. That's just an overview. It could be completely wrong, but it's sincere. 10:50 is the time. Back to Birmingham. Joy is there. You don't find much joy in Birmingham, but we found one. What would you like to say, Joy?
What I want to say is that so in 2013, I worked as a pupil guide, and we had a pay cut.
Yes.
I lost £200 because, and so I had to take another job, but we didn't have the union support. I mean, we just had to. We did try to fight it, but we just the council wouldn't give him. And so my point is that, and then also I was in the equal pay with the with the bin men because of the way they were paid.
So this is essentially what bankrupted the council, isn't it? The grade that the bin men were on and the grade that you were on meant that you should have been receiving the same pay, but you weren't. So there's a sort of massive backlog bill that the council then became liable for.
Yeah, I also blame the last government because with the austerity they cut the council's funding, which is why we ended up having less pay.
Yes.
And I think it's all going back to the government, really, with the way they have funded Birmingham City Council.
Well, I think the ruling about the equal pay, arguably they could have seen it coming, or it shouldn't have happened in the first place. But I do think it almost gets chalked up as an extraordinary circumstance, doesn't it? It's not bad management by the council leaders that causes that kind of bankruptcy. It's really, really bad news from the court. It's not like other councils that have made really stupid investments or tried to do sort of things that they should never really have been trying to do. But it doesn't change the bottom line. And the bottom line is the council's got no money, and the bin men have been told, the refuse workers have been told, well, we're going to have to take some of yours. And they've said, no, you're not. We're going on strike. And what do you think about that?
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you support them or not?
I do and I don't, because obviously with it's difficult because
yes, it is
they were still on more pay than us.
Yes.
But which they do, I can understand because both my job as a pupil guide, we had very difficult, challenging children.
Of course you do, yes.
I had to have one child once had epileptic fit on the bus, and we had to retrained. But what I'm trying to say that our job wasn't valued, as well as it been men.
And you're such a brilliant caller because you are the perfect example. So part of you supports them because their grievance is real and their action is powerful, and part of you is a little bit, I don't want to say resentful, Joy, but a little bit aggrieved, shall we say aggrieved, that other deserving workers don't have the same protections, don't have the same rights.
We don't, and I think it's wrong. I mean, both people should be paid properly. I mean, they do a difficult job as well, the bin men, and they obviously, should
I hear you. And that's what a race to the bottom looks like, because as soon as you indulge one, so it's like you remember those cartoons where you've got an angel on one shoulder and you've got a little devil on the other shoulder. So the angel in your ear is saying, workers' rights are good, and the devil is saying, well, you haven't got any, so why should they have? Why are they going on strike? You don't get looked after. And if we listen to the devil, we all end up with nothing.
That's it.
Isn't it? I think it is. Anyway, Joy, thank you. Whereabouts in Birmingham are you?
In Surrey Oak.
Surrey Oak. And are they taking your bins away at the moment or not?
Yes, we have had the agency come out and do ours, and it's not too bad where we are actually.
Where's it worst? Do you know?
I think it's more like in Small Heath and Sparkbrook, Washford Heath, that sort of area. And then there's nothing journalists like more. I'm just looking at one now than turning up with a camera crew and standing next to a massive pile of bins. What they'll all be hoping, everyone there. What is that Sky News? Everyone there will be hoping that a rat appears. If a rat appears, that journalist is going to jump 4 feet in the air. It's all planned in advance. It's absolutely certain, and great TV. Joy, great radio. Thank you. It's 10:54. Sean's in Clacton. I'll tell you who isn't, but that's for another day. Sean, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
That caller that found you argumentative, doesn't he listen to your programme?
How dare you? Carry on.
No, I'm in favour of them being on strike. They've got to clarify the figures, haven't they? How many people are involved, what money's involved.
I think so, yes. I mean, because it leaves the public in the dark, really. But the scale of the vote suggests to me that the grievance is rather more real than the council themselves allow.
Yeah. And how can you trust a council that have gone bankrupt?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same people, is it? It's the same institution.
Well,
and they went bankrupt partly because of that historic legal problem. But
but that was still their mistake, wasn't it?
Yeah, and if they're asking you, they're saying, believe everything we say. And it's a little simplistic, but they say only 17 workers will be affected. So you say, well, in that case, I'll times 17 by 8,000, and this whole thing is about 136 grand a year. That can't be true.
Yeah.
That can't be true.
No, not at all. And how much is it going to cost to clear this mess up when it eventually gets sorted out?
Well, they've already hit 7 figures, according to some reports yesterday. And the last time they did this, which Joy just referred to, it lasted 3 months, June to August. And by the time they came to an end, the council agreed to certain conditions, including the non-redundancy of specific posts. While I have you, where does the opposition come from, do you think? Where does the idea that strikes are always bad? It's so popular, sort of post-Thatcherite. Where do you think that idea comes from?
Well, I think if people have to stand, they've got to stand together, haven't they? They've got to fight for what they believe is right. And if they all stand together, they will win.
If they all stand together, they will win. It takes us back to that brilliant advert for, I think, Unite the Unison from many, many moons ago. That, like, probably one of the most effective adverts I can remember, because it has stayed in my memory for so long. And I forgot the details until the last time I mentioned it, and you reminded me. It's a big bear lying across a path. And an ant turns up alone and can't get the bear out of the way. But then the ant comes back with several million other ants, and the proposition changes immediately. Thank you, Sean. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think in the next hour we're going to turn our attention to votes for 16-year-olds, and I'm going to tell you in advance, I'm very surprised by where my opinion is this morning. It could be moved by you, but I am somewhat surprised to find it where it is this morning. But before that, Jonathan is in Bishop Stortford. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Yes, good morning, James. First of all, one could say the council is obviously broke. Like many councils, they're facing restraints on their funding, and it's probably been mismanaged by the government and all that. But the bottom line is these guys are basically phasing themselves out of jobs by doing what they're doing, because they're earning no money on strike. As I understand it, if you're on strike, you get no money at all. So they're not supporting their families. So basically, the idea, I would think, is to basically keep yourself in a job, negotiate with a job. I know people say, oh, you can't negotiate, the clout's gone if you're not on strike. But really, they're slipping down the other side of losing the job. And all that's going to happen is councils are just going to appoint outside contractors, and they'll be down the road with no job at all.
2017 proves the polar opposite of that analysis, but let's give it some benefit of the doubt and point out that if you are in a negotiation without any leverage at all, you are wasting your time in a negotiation. So what should they what should they threaten in pursuit of their ends?
Basically what they should threaten is they should reduce their hours. They say, okay, if you're going to do that to me, I'm going to reduce my hours, so I'm still going to do my job. I'm still going to do some of my job, but I'm not going to do all my job, which means it would take the sting out of the whole situation, so there wouldn't be mountains of rubbish that are built up.
Well, then it's not leverage, is it?
Yeah, but they've lost their argument already, James, because the council's broke. The council's got no money.
The council claimed it was broke in 2017 and the strikers won.
Yeah, but I mean, the other thing you could say, James, is
have you ever supported a strike? Have you ever seen a strike? Have you ever seen a strike where you thought, God, they're in the right? I really support these guys. They're definitely doing the right thing.
Yes.
Which one?
I have, yes. Under conditions and things like that. But
yeah,
I
which
just
ones?
think that it's a head in sand situation.
Which strikes?
I can't actually you put me on the spot there, but I mean, I know that's
you must be able to think of one strike in the history of humanity where you thought the workers had a point, Jonathan.
I honestly can't, James. No.
Funny
I
that,
mean,
eh?
That's probably an unfair question, to be fair.
Is
to
it?
Pull one out like that? But what I can
you got 2,000 years of civilization to choose from.
I know, but I
did begin the show by saying, didn't I, that you're very, very silly if you support all strikes, and you're very, very silly if you oppose all of them.
No, I think you've got to be.
And here you are. You can't think of a single strike. You can't think of a single strike you've ever supported.
No, well, not really. But
I'll check back with you. I'll check back with you later. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A fairly neat analysis of what not understanding industrial action sounds like, though. So very grateful to you, Jonathan. It's just gone 11 o'clock. You are listening. Well, you know who you're listening to. If you don't know by now, then frankly, I can't help you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. Why do you think and I was very delighted to see it still in the bestsellers lists when I went through the airport at the weekend. But why do you think that brilliant author Lawrence Rees, who spoke to us about his book The Nazi Mind, has had a bearing upon my thoughts about Keir Starmer's insistence that they will definitely be giving the vote to 16-year-olds? It wasn't in the King's speech, was it? I think some people made a little bit of a fuss about that, but it just means that it's not on the top of his to-do list. But he has said this week that it's a commitment we made. It's a commitment we intend to keep. It was in the manifesto, but not in the King's speech. This is a commitment to giving 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in all elections. Now, I'll leave you thinking. I'll leave you pondering that, but I will probably remember to answer the question before 11:15. And what I want you to do here is really have a think. Sorry, I know it's Tuesday, but the weather's not great. It's not like you've got a lot else you could do. I really want to have a think about what it means to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. And what you need to do, I think most helpfully, is you need to jettison thoughts of your favourite 16-year-old. You can't base this answer, can you, on one 16-year-old? So you can't say, as Charles Corran writes in the Times this morning, you can't say my children are morons and therefore giving the vote to 16-year-olds would be a ridiculous idea, or my child is a genius and therefore giving the vote to 16-year-olds is long overdue and a brilliant notion. I don't know if you can do that. I also don't know how different your political opinions are now from what they were when you were 16 or 17. I mean, if you look at the Brexit vote, then it is largely much older people who were most enthusiastic about voting to smash themselves in the face with a frying pan for the rest of eternity, economically speaking. So I do find that argument quite compelling. There is no earthly way that the 16 and 17-year-olds seeking the vote could use it to such epic national sabotage as what the 60 and 70-year-olds did with it in 2016 in that referendum, albeit an awful lot of effort was put in to persuading you of things that weren't true. But quite a lot of people are still clinging to the carcass of the notion that it was anything but idiocy. I don't think it's even true so much anymore that teenagers typically lean to the left, but on the other hand, they are more susceptible to extremism. So that perhaps gives you a clue as to why I find myself wondering, after I think a lifetime of believing that you can't have too many voters in a democracy, and 16 is a cut-off point in so many other areas. You're old enough to pay taxes, then you should really be entitled to have a say on how your taxes are spent. That is Keir Starmer's logic. I also don't want to be Anglo-centric. I don't want to be England-centric, because it has already happened in different parts of the United Kingdom and the sky did not fall in. James reminds me, 16-year-olds can already vote for governments in Scotland, the Isle of Man, Jersey and Guernsey. Why should the English be different? And that's a really good question. But I'm not sure it's quite as straightforward as I used to think it was. One colleague said to me this morning, 16-year-olds are idiots, which is a horrible and sweeping generalisation, but it isn't without a kernel of truth. So I wonder whether the best way to answer this question is actually not to imagine your favourite 16-year-old, but to imagine 16-year-old you. Well, that doesn't work either, does it? Because you might think, I was so politically engaged. I was doing a politics A-level when I was 16. Of course I should have had the vote. I knew more about politics at the age of 16 than the average Brexit voter did at the age of 65. Okay, a bit arrogant. But if you've done an A-level in politics, then are you more politically qualified to vote? If you're in the middle of an A-level in politics, are you more politically qualified to vote than somebody who has never opened a newspaper in their life, somebody who never watches the news, someone who is not remotely politically engaged? Sorry, the colleague said that they are nuts. Not what word did I use a moment ago? Not idiots, nuts. No, they said 16-year-olds are nuts. No clues at all as to who that colleague is. But 16-year-olds are nuts, not idiots. That's quite an important distinction. 16-year-olds are nuts. I had a friend who used to come out of the pub, and I know we were drinking underage, and he couldn't walk past scaffolding without climbing up it. It's a miracle he's still alive to tell the tale. He would not do that now, not with his knees. But 16-year-olds can be a little bit nuts. And yet I look at what the adults have done in recent years, and I genuinely, this isn't me just being mischievous or provocative for the sake of it, I genuinely find myself thinking they can't be any more nuts than the grown-ups, can they? They can't be any more nuts than the adults who are currently enfranchised. So, 9 minutes after 11, I want to know what you think about this, but crucially, I want to know why you think it. And I suspect that the strongest views will be held by the youngest people who really want to vote. It's quite a weird thing to say to someone, isn't it? Particularly in the context of the last few years of political movement, that you have no say in the direction that your country is going to take. And remember, there can be a 5-year gap. So it could be the day before your 18th birthday. You're going to be practically, you're going to be 23 potentially, as near as damn it, before you actually get to cast a vote. You could have finished. You could have gone 3 years at university, 2 years in the workshop, in the workforce, and now you're allowed to have a vote. I know the same applies. If you get the vote at 16, it could still be 5 years until you get a vote, but 21 feels a lot younger than 23. I've always liked this idea, but something Lawrence Rees said when he was talking to us about the Nazi mind, it turns out, has been just bubbling away in the back of my brain ever since. And I think I might actually remind you of what it was he said. The elements of the new psychological insights, it's obedience, authority, and the brain.
Yeah, and also, crucially, something I hadn't realised at all, which is the corruption of youth under 25. I hadn't realised. So the bit that's coming in, where essentially you've got absolute rationality, prefrontal cortex. It's the bit that says, "Don't have that second piece of cake. It's going to make you fat, for God's sake." So that bit is not fully developed in people until they're 25. It's not fully developed. It's why people under 25 are much more impulsive, much more capable of going off doing crazy things. It's not fully developed. So you see that the Nazis appealed in the 30s to disproportionate number of people under 25.
Wow.
And they're doing it because, and Hitler is deliberately in his speeches saying, "Come on, boys, excitement, we can do it." And the whole pseudo-Darwinianism, life's about, if you want it, just take it. It's absolutely playing into this because that bit, for other reasons he explained to me, isn't developed in us till we're 25 fully.
So it's our atavistic or primitive self that is being appealed to. It's a great piece I read recently by the novelist Edward Docks about ogres.
Yes.
And using Trump alongside Grendel out of Beowulf and Polyphemus out of the Greek. That's what he appeals to. He's essentially telling people that you can indulge all of your appetites.
Yeah, but that, you see, this is because what I couldn't understand when I started meeting these people is how, for many of these former Nazis, life had been really boring since this had gone away. Because I think someone said to me that you cannot imagine the excitement. The thing about Hitler was that what absolutely turned him on was radicalism. And you soon learnt that if you work for him, and he sometimes would make 2 or 3 people appoint to the same job and never say because as part of his Darwinian process, and never say who was actually in charge. The way you had power was to come up with a radical solution. And it may not even be that he accepted it. A person we interviewed for the original Nazi series said he heard Hitler say he was annoyed with his generals because he said, "I want my generals to be bulldogs on chains, and I'm holding them back. That's what I want." And he said, "I'm having to excite them. No, they need to be like that, and I'm restraining them."
So you could use that as a basis for suggesting that 16-year-olds shouldn't get the vote. But if you were to take it to its logical conclusion, then you shouldn't get the vote until you're over 25. Is that the phone-in? What about only having votes for the over 25s? I don't know if the Labour Party would ever get in, would it? And the demographics change. I mean, as Lawrence pointed out there in that book, if you're wondering, called The Nazi Mind, 12 Warnings from History, is a blooming masterpiece. And the genius of what he's done, I said this at the time, but you may not have been listening, is avoid entirely any explicit references to the modern world. It is entirely confined to the era in which the Nazis operated. There are obvious parallels. That is why the subtitle of the book is 12 Warnings from History, but he lets the warnings make themselves. He doesn't have to point out parallels or similarities because they will jump off the page and slap you around the face with a wet kipper. But, of course, it's not an open and shut case that because these brains, these unformed brains, are so easily corrupted, if you like, or so easily influenced, they shouldn't have the vote, because that applies until 25 in its most extreme cases. And, of course, it applies afterwards. I mean, where would politics in this country be if significant numbers of people still didn't fall for the snake oil and nonsense spouted by Nigel Farage? The Liz Truss Donald Trump fan who claims to represent, I don't know who he's claiming to represent, ordinary working people. And that is not something that you suddenly grow out of when you are 25. And Scotland are, as in many areas, ahead of the rest of us, Scotland and other parts of the United Kingdom. I like this message from, I'm not going to find it now, from Sharon. We have voting from 16 in Scotland. In Scottish government elections, it has a very high uptake. All pupils at school study modern studies, political issues and processes in the UK and international society. It's the most popular exam subject to take after maths and English. So I think the last hour was quite punchy. A couple of calls from the perspective of refuse workers, bin men and women, shouldn't be on strike. I don't think I want this to be punchy. I think I would have done this punchy in the past, but I don't think it's an open and shut case. Partly because of what Lawrence Rees said, partly because of what my colleague said about 16-year-olds being nuts, partly because of the journeys we all go on. None of these are nails in the coffin of votes for 16-year-olds, but I just wonder whether it is a slightly more nuanced subject than I personally have previously allowed, which is why fascinated I am by what you think. I am almost always on this programme much, much more interested in why you think it. So it's not like a plebiscite where we just stick our hand in the air if we're in favour and leave it in our pockets if we're not. I really want to know the thinking behind what you do, because I have struggled to come up with a template for this. I said, don't just think of your favourite 16-year-old, or don't just think of your least favourite 16-year-old, and don't think of your 16-year-old self, because that's not representative. But what is? So I think I'd have been fairly reliable to cast a vote when I was 16, but I don't think you would have been, or vice versa. And if you got two children, you might think one would have been brilliant. One was much more thoughtfully engaged with politics than their parents were. But the other one couldn't tell you who the Prime Minister is. Do you see what I mean? I don't know how you arrive at the conclusion you've arrived at, which is why I want you to tell me. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. At the moment, just so you know, the biggest obstacle to me opposing votes for 16-year-olds is the absolutely incontrovertible evidence on both sides of the Atlantic and far beyond that much, much older people shouldn't have been given the vote in the first place. It's 11:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 11. How can your 16-year-old self not be representative? Everybody has one, and you can't choose a different one, right? Steve, who describes himself as confused in France. I just meant it's not representative of anyone except you, Steve. So you can't really arrive at a conclusion about all 16-year-olds by looking through the lens of what you were like when you were 16. But the more I talk about this, the more knots I'm tying myself in. What else are you going to do? Who can take a view? Teachers. Teachers can take a view. Sixth form teachers can take a view on whether lower six and upper six students are less equipped, more equipped, or not equipped to cast a vote compared to older people. And I'm back to Chris in Lincoln on this one. Should the more important question be, at what age should we stop being able to vote because so many older citizens are unable to understand and grasp the modern world of work and the experiences of younger generations? And Chris got his message read out because he began it by writing, I love you like a brother, James. But if 16 and 17-year-olds are to be disenfranchised due to lack of maturity or critical mental facilities, what about the older people? So I want to know what you think, but I really, really, really want to know why you think it. Lee's in Woking. Lee, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
At the moment, in the current state of the world, I don't think 16-year-olds should have the vote right now. I think that comes down to, I look at myself, and as a 16-year-old, I didn't have the desire or the want to look deep enough into policies or governments that are on the plate and see what they can offer me as a 16-year-old.
Yeah. Do you not think you might have done if you had a vote?
No. To be very plainly, no. I think when I was 16, living at home, going through the education system, it would have been very far down on my list of priorities as a 16, 17-year-old to look into that. And I think it's one of those things where, my life's been
it's a terrible phone line, Lee. I don't know what you've done since you spoke to the producer, but I don't know, it's my age. My patience with terrible phone lines is really wearing thin at the moment. We'll try and get you back. Oddly, two thoughts listening to Lee. The first is, here is someone who was incredibly politically engaged when they were 16 and wants the vote for 16-year-olds. Do they just cancel each other out? That's the knot that I was tying myself in earlier. And he kind of pushed me in the opposite direction from the one that he was trying to lead me in, because I thought, well, you wouldn't just give them the vote. You'd do what they'd done in Scotland with that excellent point Sharon made about really bringing it into the curriculum, really driving home to children how valuable and powerful their vote is. Using the medium in Scotland of what they call modern studies, the political issues and processes in the UK and international society. So you teach Lee, 16-year-old Lee, modern studies, and you impress upon him how important the vote is, and you take a disenfranchised, disengaged 16-year-old and turn them into an engaged 16-year-old with a vote. Taylor is in Glasgow. Taylor, what would you like to say?
Thank you for allowing me on the show, James.
You make it sound like there's a high bar, Taylor. Honestly, we'll let anyone on. You've got to fill your boots.
Well, it's my favourite show to listen to, your show.
Thank you, mate.
So I was a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament between 2015 and 2017, and I was also a member of the British Youth Parliament as well.
Okay.
Which I don't think a lot of young people are there, but at the same time, it was on the rise when I was part of it. Now, yes. We spoke in 2016, 2017 in Westminster, some of the only other people allowed to speak in Westminster.
Yeah.
And we passed a motion for 16, 17-year-olds to vote. Yet Theresa May's government did not decide to take this further. Now, in Scotland, you can leave school at 16, you can join the army, you can get married, you can have a child, and in Scotland you can vote in Scottish elections, but you can't vote in Westminster elections. Now, I think that's because the union's too scared they're going to lose us, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But if young people can become independent young adults and they want to be treated like that, why are they not allowed a democratic vote? They shouldn't be made to fight for it. A lot of young people, as Sharon had said in that message, it's in schools. People are taught politics internationally. They're taught about the voting systems, especially how the voting system works in Scotland and how the voting system works in the UK.
So they go hand in hand. I mean, it was missing from my introduction, actually. It took Sharon to get to make me give my head a wobble. You don't just suddenly announce tomorrow that also you do what they've done in Scotland and almost embark upon a programme of electoral education.
For sure.
Right.
And the one thing that I think that I don't like Nigel Farage, but the one thing I think his party have done well is their social media advertising.
Yeah, that's very true.
And a lot of young people have looked at their stuff and went, "Oh, I quite like what he's saying," and not reading too much into it. And I think that happens more south of the border.
A lot of old people have done that as well, mate. Albeit not through social media or not through TikTok, through Facebook and endless appearances on Question Time as well. But you're right. I mean, it does speak to an enfranchisement of younger people. And 16 is a logical cut-off point because, as you've reminded us, it's a cut-off point for so many other things.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's been maybe such an uptake of reform down south of the border because of their advertisement. And I think if, like in Scotland, politics was a more focused subject in school,
yes,
young people would be more educated and have more educated guess on who they would like to vote for in their local constituency.
So the more education you have, the harder you are to bamboozle.
Exactly. You're not just the wool pulled over your eyes straight away kind of thing.
Which brings us to Donald Trump's attempts to punish universities in the United States of America and the fascistic program always of going after educators. I love that. Thank you, Taylor. What are you doing now? If you don't mind me asking, if that's not too nosy, what have you continued down a political path after your membership of both youth parliaments?
I fell out of love of politics after we left the EU. So I'm now working in the music industry.
Fair enough. Fair enough, actually. Of course, we need your generation to not necessarily lead us back into the EU, but to stay angry about what's been done to you by the older generations. And that's a valid point, isn't it? I talk about that demographic in the budget column in The Economist magazine this week, pointing out that so many people have passed away. And that seems to be the constituency that people like Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch are most worried about at the moment, largely as a consequence of Farage, as Taylor reminded us, and using social media, especially the really short stuff, the really sort of clippy stuff of social media, as an electoral tool is a terrible enemy of proper democracy, because it means people are going to be more susceptible to ludicrous slogans and or racist lies. But hey-ho, gets you into the White House, it could get you into Downing Street. 11:26 is the time. Staying in Scotland, not surprisingly, I don't think, given that they're already there in some ways on this issue. Richie is in Edinburgh. Richie, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Richie.
Hi, I'm like I said to your colleague, I'm a serving member of the Royal Marines.
Oh, God.
And I joined when I was 18, not 16.
Right.
But I do fit your parameters as well. I don't have children. My partner and I decided quite a while ago not to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to favour...
Just pick your favourite 16-year-old, no.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to do that. But what I would say is... your colleague was asking me about the best example of what a 16-year-old in the military can do.
Yes.
That a 16-year-old outside the military can't do, sorry.
Yeah.
And I would say there's a task force that sometimes gets called up for the military called MAGA, the Military Assistance to Government Authorities.
Right.
So, for instance, the bin dispute in Birmingham, there will be several factors of the military that will get called in for that. So if you can use 16-year-olds in the military to combat a social or political debate, then surely they should be allowed to voice their opinion when it comes to the general elections.
So it is that, it's a variation on no taxation without representation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You shouldn't be required to contribute to a society that you have no say in the running of. It seems like a no-brainer. So that wobble I had was because of the susceptibility of the young brain to certain snake oils and poisons. But I albeit that Lawrence Rees's point was scientifically supported, it doesn't feel like a massive cut-off point. As we look back over our own lives, I don't think I reached 25 and suddenly became sensible. Not by a long chalk.
Oh no, and let's have a look at the last, say, 14 years in UK politics. If the vast majority of people that have voted for consecutive Tory governments have been over the age of 55, then surely we should put a maximum on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially as the older you get, then the less impact the choice of government is actually going to have on your life. I mean, by definition, because there won't be as many years of impact as there will be for younger voters, and in the case of 16 and 17-year-olds, non-voters. Richie, thank you. I mean, it is hard to resist elements of this. I wonder, I'd not looked at the numbers, but I wonder if would votes for 16 and 17-year-olds have stopped Brexit? If they'd had a vote in the referendum, would there have been enough of them? I doubt it. But it might have changed the conversation. You'd have had an awful lot of parents and grandparents thinking twice about voting to impose economic sanctions on their children and grandchildren, wouldn't you? If their children and grandchildren were sufficiently engaged with the debate to really get stuck in because they actually had a say in it. Whereas if they didn't have a say in it, the temptation to leave it alone or to look the other way or to sit on your hands would have been a lot harder to resist. My 16-year-old is an idiot, writes Wayne in Ascot. So, there it is. Hang on, that's only the first line of his text. But so is my 75-year-old dad, who wrote for Brexit. Wayne, I don't want to ruin your day, mate, but I mean, unless things have skipped a generation, you don't necessarily emerge very well from this message. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:32 is the time. I guess it's a question of trust as well, trust and warmth. You trust 16-year-olds to exercise their vote. Why would you trust them any less than 65-year-olds? And if you're going to bring the argument about brain development into it, then a couple of you have pointed out that brain performance declines, I think, once you pass 40, measurably every year. That's why you can't remember why you wandered into the kitchen after you get that. That's probably not scientifically sound, that little nugget there, but you take my point. And it increases democratic engagement, and it makes young people care more. And they seem, as in so many things, to have shown the way somewhat in Scotland. So who resists it most violently, the notion of votes for 16 and 17-year-olds? People that don't like other humans? Is that too unkind? Or it's no, I don't hate all humans, I just don't like young ones. Or is that unfair? Is there a more sophisticated analysis than that goes beyond saying they were a bit nuts, aren't they? Or at least I was a bit nuts. I didn't care about politics. Well, that's a you problem. Show me a 40-year-old who doesn't care about politics, and you don't show me someone making a case that 40-year-olds shouldn't have a vote. I don't know. 11:33 is the time. Noel is in Brighton. Noel, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello, Noel.
Hi, so basically, just for a bit of context, I'm an A-level politics student. I'm 18 years old. And so I basically think the real big issue here is with education, because I finished school in 2023 and I had form time every day for 5 years, and only once was it about politics ever. So I really think we need to think about education when it comes into this, because otherwise a lot of 16-year-olds are just going to be susceptible to populism. They've seen Nigel Farage on social media, as the previous caller was talking about.
But that doesn't, and I'll give you the same answer that I gave to him. It doesn't make 16-year-olds any different from their granddads, who are equally susceptible to the snake oil and lies. So we don't deny the older, credulous characters the vote. Why would we deny the younger ones the vote?
Because I think that it's just expanding the problem further unnecessarily. Because you're completely right with the older generation there. They're susceptible to the right-wing media, as you speak about in your book, and it's just education. It's just a really big problem.
So if we do it hand in hand, if we take the Scottish model and you actually have a requirement for young people, for school pupils to be taught modern issues, I think that's what they actually call it, and it includes domestic and international politics. You almost have a module on the importance of the vote. You learn about suffragettes, exactly, you learn about universal suffrage, but also about how relatively recently it was in our history that only landowners had the vote, or only men had the vote, or only some men had the vote. And you just drive that home educationally. Then you create an environment in which I think the average 16-year-old would be demanding the vote.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think if people were aware of how important it was, 16-year-olds would come to realise how important it actually affects their lives.
And it's not just the right-wing risk. Oddly, well, I bet this doesn't happen to you very often, Noel. Another Noel has pointed out, this one's in Nottingham. Noel in Nottingham writes, why the focus on just the right-wing risk? Extremism. Extremism, people who are susceptible to extremism.
Yeah.
Populism. It doesn't have to be right-wing. What happened to you then? Why did you come out of that very apolitical education determined to do a politics A-level?
Well, growing up in Brighton is definitely a factor, but I can't really put it all on that.
No.
I honestly couldn't pinpoint it to you, to be honest.
Fair enough.
I genuinely don't know. I just became interested back in politics in year 11, and just throughout my A-level, once I come to understand the voting systems, I think that helps to sort of stray people away from populism.
Yeah, of course, and that's a big priority for your generation, or a big issue for your generation, and you're enjoying your A-level.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Good man. And final question, were you born on Christmas Day?
No, nearly. I was supposed to be born on the 27th of December, but I was just after.
I've only got one mate called Noel, and he was actually born on Christmas Day. Thank you, Noel. Lovely stuff. 11:36. I wonder whether Noel in Nottingham was born on Christmas Day. Frank's in Carlisle. Frank, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you again.
Likewise.
So when I was at school, and I'm a similar age to you, we had a sixth form general election.
Yeah.
And this would have been around about the time John Major had recently come into power.
Yeah.
So all the regular political party reps did political party stuff, but it was won by a landslide by Chris, the independent candidate, and his policy was he would end unemployment by equipping every unemployed person with a toothbrush and setting them to clean the M6 motorway.
Yes.
And that's what got the vote. So my point there is that, people are swayed by a really simple argument, but
One of my children had a primary school election where the lad who promised free sweets romped home, and then there was an epic scandal because it turned out he didn't have any sweets to give away after all.
Well, that's like school council, isn't it? Where they all say, right, we'll get a pool table.
We'll abolish homework,
beanbags
and foosball, all of that. I mean, but this doesn't denigrate entire generations, a whole nation full of sixth formers, does it?
No, because people voted for silly reasons, for simple reasons to complex problems, on all of the votes I can recall in my lifetime.
So it's not an exclusive problem to this generation.
And I think, a lot of the points that have been raised today, like education, if you were going to give the vote to 16-year-olds, you would hope that along with that, you developed as a nation a package of some form of education that everybody got. Because the guy who just said that he got no political information in his form time, I came out of teaching a few years back, but it depends on the school. Some places do it really well, some don't, because it's not part of the national curriculum.
And it should be.
Yeah, well, totally, it should be, yeah.
It really should be. And that is actually another reason in favour of giving them the vote, because it would go hand in hand with the education. No, what would it be? No representation without education. And that takes away the family tree argument as well, because you look up the family tree and see all the older people who never really got the education about the importance of the vote, or indeed the importance of critical thinking, or do what they do in Estonia and other countries that might be next on Vladimir Putin's list if Donald Trump carries on gift wrapping Ukraine for him, where they teach in schools about how to have a relationship with the media, how to spot lies, how to spot genuinely fake news, alternative facts, snake oil and lies, which brings us back to Donald Trump and his claim overnight that that Ukraine started the war. I've felt today again, I've mentioned this to you a few times. Thank you, Frank. I've got two Franks, actually. Two Knowles and two Franks. Can anyone do a joke? Is there a joke there? Two Knowles and two Franks? So Noel in Nottingham, Noel in Brighton, Frank in Carlisle, and next up, Frank in Liverpool. But before that, I just mentioned that Simon Marks will join us in 10 minutes or so, because the days I feel it's slipping out of reach, the days I feel I can't keep up with everything. So just three things today. Trump claiming that Ukraine started the war. Trump going after Harvard University standing up to Trump's attempts to silence protest on campus. Where are all the free speech warriors who had such enormous bees in their bonnets about transgender issues, claiming that freedom of speech was really important? Where are they all when Donald Trump and the President of the United States of America is literally trying to shut down dissent? That student from Tufts, or Tafts, forgive me, I forget which, who was spirited off the streets. They provided the grounds for her abduction now by the authorities, and it was the co-authorship of an article for the student newspaper about Gaza, snatched off the streets. So there's that. There's the education stuff. There's the Ukraine stuff, and then there is some footage of him when he didn't realise he would be overheard, saying to the president of El Salvador that you're going to have to start building more facilities because we're going to start sending homegrown people to your effective concentration camps shortly. And you sort of find yourself thinking, I can't keep up with all of this, but you have to try. And when I am struggling, I call Simon Marks to get me back on the straight and narrow. Or I speak to someone like the man I spoke to yesterday as a guest on a forthcoming Full Disclosure, Kenneth Roth, who ran the Human Rights Foundation for 30 years, Human Rights Watch. And I mean, who really, really knows what he's talking about. 11:41 is the time. As promised, Frank is in Liverpool. Frank, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello there, James.
Hello, Frank.
I just totally agree with 16-year-olds getting the vote.
Why?
I was very impressed when they had the referendum in Scotland. I interviewed quite a few. I was very impressed with their intelligence, the way they thought. I just disagree about us old age people. I mean, I'm 77 this year, and my views haven't changed an awful lot over the years.
Well, this is the problem with generalising. Just because Wayne's 16-year-old son is a moron doesn't mean that all 16-year-olds are morons, and just because his 75-year-old dad is a moron, this is under Wayne's own reasoning, by the way. I don't want to be accused of maligning Wayne's family. It doesn't mean that all 75-year-olds are morons as well. But is a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old going to be more susceptible to I don't know, brainwashing or grooming or whatever you want to call it, snake oil, extremism? I'm not sure.
No, I think we're all so susceptible to it. It's just amazing how people are brainwashed. I mean, I served in the army for quite a few years, And most of the people I served with were working class.
Yes.
And absolutely shocked by the time they served and there were senior ranks, how their political views had changed.
Yeah, well, what's the biggest thing you've changed on? Since you were 16?
I remember when I was young, hearing about being told by some of my family about the Dockers kids going round barefoot, and the Dockers being in pens, but So my views haven't changed a great deal.
That's it, and it takes us back to the conversation we're having in the first hour about trade unions and collective bargaining. It's not that long ago that we had neither. As Frank reminds us, this is rather nice from Matilda. Thank you, Matilda. Hi, James. I've been listening to your show with my dad. What a wonderful way to spend the Easter holidays. I can't think of anything finer, as long as you're sharing an egg while you do it. And as a 15-year-old, I strongly believe that 16-year-olds should get the vote. We are no more susceptible to extremist propaganda than the older generations. In fact, we receive PSHE lessons upon PSHE lessons, explaining how to tell fact from fiction online. It leaves us much more prepared than those older than us who haven't received that information or education. I think we're also missing the point that our planet is in fact on fire, and we are the ones who are expected to live with and fix that. Writes Matilda, making an incredibly powerful case for giving her the vote immediately, even though she's still only 15. It is 11:44. Let me squeeze in Mark, who's in concert. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I'm kind of sitting on the fence on this. I think when it comes to Brexit and climate change and important issues which young people certainly tend to vote in favour of, I think it's a good thing. But I remember I went to a half-decent school, and when I was in the sixth form, it came time to vote for the head prefect. And on the one hand, we had a very intelligent, educated, straight-laced lad. It was, talking about, and they all had to give a presentation. And he was talking about free stationery or subsidised stationery. And on the other hand, we had, I'm thinking Nigel Farage here, the snake oil salesman, the Nazi mind and everything. We had a class, the year lunatic who was saying, I'm not being like we couldn't put, two and two together. He was basically saying free pasties, free pizzas on a Friday and everything.
What's not to like?
And lo and behold, he got the popular vote. Now, luckily, the teachers, who I suppose had the sense, overruled us. But you can see how it's kind of when you're talking about a very flexible mind that wants fun and wants
of course. I mean, I don't know if the system would accommodate that. Someone turning up promising free pasties on Fridays.
Well, what's Nigel Farage done? What might he come out with?
I meant literally, but you're right. I mean, look at the trouble George Osborne got into when he put a tax on pasties. So maybe your lunatic friend was actually a bit ahead of his time.
It is difficult, though. I'm not very I guess I should be more trusting of 16-year-olds, but I'm not just talking about myself, but
of course,
pretty much half the school voted for him.
Yeah, yes, but they weren't taking the election seriously, and I guess at some point you're going to have to either explain to them why they should, or make sure that they do. There's plenty of people who don't take elections seriously. You have literal loonies running in general elections, don't you, from the Monster Raving Loony Party? So that comic relief that is part of our democratic pageant wouldn't necessarily lead to the Free Pasty Party actually ending up in Downing Street or sucking up a significant part of the vote. I love that. Here's a quick test to see how much you've been paying attention over the last 20 years. I don't think anybody, and it's remarkable given how often I recycle my own anecdotes and stories from my own life. I would be amazed, and let me just make sure that my inbox, I'm just going to close that brilliant message from Matilda. Ollie writes, don't give Matilda the vote, give her the bloody keys. I think I know what you mean. I stood for election at my school when I was 11, so that would have been the 83 general election, wouldn't it? I don't think anybody is going to satisfactorily or rather successfully guess that what party I stood for. All right, it's not the Monster Raving Loony Party, so get that one out now. And remember, I was 11, and the school leaving age was 13. It was my prep school, so I couldn't be any of the big parties because they got bagsied by the big boys. That's another word I haven't said for 30 years. Bagsied. I said pegged yesterday in the context of pegging it out of the door. Not that one. Pegging it out the door, and a bagsied today. It's incredible how these words come floating back from the distant past. So what part? And you have to know. 1983. I want to know if you know or if you're guessing. So try and communicate to me. If I've actually said it on air before, I can't remember What party did I run for in the school general election in 1983? I'm not even going to give you a clue because that would be giving it away. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:50 is the time. You've told the story many times, writes Joe in Doncaster. Somewhat sniffily, Joe, I think. It's the SDP. Well, if I have told the story many times, Joe in Doncaster, you weren't paying attention. Because it was not the SDP, it was the SDLP, which admittedly was a slightly strange choice of political party for a schoolboy in Worcestershire in 1983 to run for, given that it only had traction in Northern Ireland at the time. But that's who I decided to run for, as an advocate of Irish reunification at the tender age of 11. I got quite a lot of votes, unfortunately, probably for the same reasons that the pasty man got all the votes at that school in Durham at around the same time. I'm not sure it was a result of my carefully considered oratory. I think it was a bit more of a popularity contest, and all of my mates voted for me, despite probably not having a clue what SDLP even stood for. Simon Marks is just waiting in the wings. Before that, listen to this.
President Zelensky, sir, about his offer to purchase more Patriot missile batteries?
Oh, I don't know. He's always looking to purchase missiles. You know, he's against. Listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size, and then hope that people give you some missiles.
So Ukraine started the war by very foolishly getting invaded by Russia. Amazing logic. And it's not funny, of course. Dan Snow, the history guy, has pointed out that in Hitler's last will and testament, dictated hours before he committed suicide 80 years ago in April 1945, Hitler insisted that no one had wanted war in 1939. It had been forced on him by international Jewry and its helpers. I've done it before, and I will almost certainly be doing it again. But on the days when it feels a little bit like things are slipping away because so much is happening, we page Simon Marks, LBC's Washington editor, and here he is. That's one bit, the Zelensky bit. I think that the Harvard bit is relevant, and the El Salvador bit looks like today's top 3, Simon, but I've probably missed 10.
Yeah, well, there's always more. But look, I think that those comments yesterday in the Oval Office, and it's the second time at least that Donald Trump has publicly claimed that Ukraine started the war, and yesterday going further and saying, oh, well, Zelensky just always wants more missiles, always looking to buy more arms. I mean, it's the latest demonstration of the fact that he is continuing to try and tilt the outcome of peace negotiations in Russia's favour. His special envoy, Steve Witkoff, was welcomed to the Kremlin a couple of days back, absolutely with open arms by Vladimir Putin. Republicans on Capitol Hill yesterday, some of them, reacted to those comments by Donald Trump and got in touch with the White House to say, look, I mean, we are still, many of us, supportive of Ukraine and its war aims, but they are not in the driving seat of any negotiations that are going to take place. There have been moments when Donald Trump has expressed frustration over what he has argued have been attempts by Vladimir Putin to kind of run out the clock on this discussion about advancing a peace agreement. But, you know, those comments yesterday, like so many of the other things that the president says on so many different issues, were just laced with disdain and loathing towards, arguably, the bravest, most courageous European leader the continent has seen since Winston Churchill. And it is absolutely apparent that he is going to cut the legs out from underneath Volodymyr Zelensky and from the Ukrainian people at every possible turn, still fuming over the fact that the Ukrainians haven't agreed to hand over 50% of their valuable rare earth minerals to the United States for decades to come to repay America for what he insists has been $350 billion, sometimes it's $500 billion, depending on what day of the week it is, in his telling of US aid to Ukraine. So further evidence that he's absolutely still tilting everything in Vladimir Putin's favour.
And no pushback in the room. We've circled around this subject for a while now, but it's going to get worse, not better, because you would expect a journalist to say, hang on a minute, Mr. President, are you suggesting that Ukraine started the war by getting invaded?
No pushback in the room. I mean, let's be clear. The White House is defying now a court order that requires it to restore the Associated Press, the news agency, highly respected, to the White House reporting pool. And again, I've got to caution listeners that when you see these interactions now in the Oval Office and you hear that a reporter asked the president a question, invariably the men and women asking the questions are not reporters. They are polemicists working for propaganda outlets owned and operated by Donald Trump's wealthy supporters and political friends. And so the entire pattern of conversation within those White House encounters has substantially shifted in the last few weeks in the direction of right-leaning news organizations that are now invariably front and center. Even over the weekend, an interaction with Brian Glenn, a propagandist from Real America's Voice, who is the partner of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, the conspiracy theory believing representative from Georgia, in which Brian Glenn was literally blowing smoke at the president over the outcome of his routine physical over the weekend. And the two of them were it was locker room talk between the two of them about the physical prowess and stamina of the president of the United States. It is rare now to see any kind of meaningful interaction in those encounters.
And we're only 100 days in. I hope the audio quality here is good enough. This is an exchange between Trump and the president of El Salvador, which was recorded almost by accident. Someone spotted it on the feed as they made their way into the room.
Homegrowns are next. The homegrowns built. You got to build about 5 more places. Yeah, that's big. All right. It's not big enough.
That's Trump describing how he wants to deport homegrowns to El Salvador next, and that the president there, Bukele, would have to build 5 more places. I mentioned Rolling Stone earlier as an antidote to the pseudo-journalism you just described, Simon, and they ran with the headline, Trump and Bukele bond over human rights abuses in Oval Office meeting. And I don't know whether the laughter in the background is more chilling than the words.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the most shameful Oval Office encounters that I can remember. I mean, it's hard in the modern era to imagine anything more shameful than what took place there yesterday, because Bukele, of course, is the El Salvadorian dictator, elected to power, but absolutely on the same kind of populist ticket that Donald Trump has espoused, who is now acting as Donald Trump's private jailer. So you've seen hundreds of people, detainees, mostly Venezuelans, wind up in a terrorist detention facility in El Salvador, again in defiance of court orders, the checks and balances in the United States falling away by the day. And in that interaction yesterday, the president was essentially saying to Nayib Bukele, build another 5 prisons, because what he is thinking about doing is denaturalizing American citizens, stripping even American citizens who are convicted of crimes of their passports, of their citizenship, and sending them to El Salvador's gulag. This is now a theory that the White House is investigating and advancing. Rolling Stone, that you mentioned, reported on it just a few days ago. We've heard the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, advancing that there is a legal path for them to strip Americans of their citizenship. And at a time when they're saying to places like Harvard University, they want to come in and they want to audit the staff for the viewpoints of the faculty, the student body. They want to reduce the power of students, faculty and administrators. That's why they're withholding more than $1 billion in aid to Harvard University. They are threatening to go after people who don't support Donald Trump, who don't openly espouse admiration for what he's doing, and potentially even strip them of their citizenship and send them into El Salvador's gulag. It is an astonishing place for the United States to have reached.
And as you have reminded us many times, it's only one of the stories worthy of those superlatives, if that's quite the right word, but that incredibly powerful language. Simon Marks, I know you've got another appointment imminently, so I shall thank you now for that and remind you listening that not only that, of course, he released and pardoned all of the people who were attacking police on January the 6th, but also that it's not about law and order. Fascism always claims to be about law and order, but as Simon just reminded you, the same people will be making up the laws. The people that hid Anne Frank's family were breaking the law, and the people that betrayed them to the authorities were following the law. And it's not by accident that Simon uses words like gulags. But, hey-ho, I can't remember what it is that you're celebrating. Is it still owning the libs? I forget. Is it what? I don't know. But, well done. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Okay, a complete change of pace now. And a visit to what is, I think, by most measures, the shallow end of the news, but it's a curious topic, and it is a topic quite close to my heart, and for somewhat embarrassing reasons. It's a remarkable social change. Some massive changes happen by parliamentary edict, or rather by legislation, and you look back and you think, why did we ever do things differently? So I would put the smoking ban on that list. I try to explain to young people how what's the word? Not omniscient. What's the word? Omnipresent. Anyway, how smoke was just absolutely everywhere when I was their age. They can't quite get their head around it. I remember my mate's dad driving us to school with the windows shut and chain smoking all the way there. And if we opened the windows in the back, he'd tell us to close them because he was cold. It was like, there's a wonderful thing in 2000 AD. I always refer back to Judge Dredd when I'm thinking about the smoking ban, because they had it was like a smokarium or whatever it was called. And the people who were still addicted to nicotine would have to go into this sort of hermetically sealed bubble. And I don't even know that you'd need to light up a cigarette. You'd just be able to go in there and passively smoke everybody else's. And it was a wonderful example of science fiction sort of getting dystopia correct. The prediction of how outrageous smoking was and would be seen to be, but made at a time when it was not. It was not perceived as being as disgusting as it often is now. Not always. Some people still do it. I don't want to go after you. I'm just pointing out that social change is extraordinary when you get to my age, and you can't quite believe the completeness of the U-turn that society has taken. Some people were resistant to the idea of making seatbelts compulsory in cars, which is almost impossible to believe until you look at people today who hate being told what to do, whatever it may be. So I'm trying to think of other examples of it, which are not legislative, which are just in the way that we look at things. I told you I was in Ireland at the weekend, and the brilliant tour guide we had on the Viking Splash tour was running through church attendance in Ireland as we drove past some notable churches and how it has gone off a cliff. And of course, I think a large part of that will be the child sex abuse scandals that have riven the island of Ireland in recent years. And you sort of think that I never thought that would have happened. In 1972, a teenager in Southern Ireland, or in the west of Ireland, no, in Southern Ireland, so southeast, it doesn't matter where it was, she got pregnant, and it was me. And because the church had such a stranglehold on society in Ireland in 1972, she had to come to this country and give me up for adoption. And you look at the change in Ireland over that period. In some ways now they feel a lot more backwards than we do. Economically, we've swapped position in terms of growth. Membership of the European Union, of course, being a huge boon to their economy, and the idea that those roles would be reversed. And speaking of social change, the way that in the United States of America they reversed Roe versus Wade, one of the great victories for humanity, and yet it was reversed by, I don't want to say the usual suspects. Yes, ubiquitous was the word I was looking for, James, thank you. Not omnipresent, that's a silly word. Ubiquitous is a lovely word. So I'm fascinated by changes, and I'm more fascinated by the changes I've made. The things I can't quite believe I used to believe. I've written a book about it, but this didn't get into the book. Because for reasons I don't fully understand, and I want to explore with you, in the year 2000, Have you heard Pulp's new single, by the way? That reference is quite easy to get, isn't it? In the year 2000, I thought it was very important to me when I got married that my wife would take my surname. I wonder how long you've been listening to the programme and whether or not you're surprised by that. I think I still can come across a bit patriarchy sometimes. Nobody's perfect, and I find it hard to shake some of the presumptions and even prejudices that I developed growing up. But I would like to think that if you're a relatively recent arrival on this programme, or the more recent you are, the more shocked you would be to learn that it was actually quite important to me that my wife took my name, and I don't really know why. It may have something to do with being adopted, as I've just alluded to, and being the only son, and therefore the idea of that line somehow petering out, or because by dint of your wife taking your name, then your children do too. And I mean, I'll have to check when I go home, because I didn't know this was going to be in the news today. I don't think that we had heated discussions about it. I suspect that the woman I refer to on the programme as Mrs. O'Brien, but who is not really known by that name in any other context, I suspect that she did what she's done throughout our marriage and just sort of said, yes, dear, while intending to do quite the opposite, regardless of how passionate my feelings may have been. So now, today, just a third. Well, the way it's written in the Daily Mail gives me pause. Not for the first time. Just a third of young British women want to take their partner's surname. I kind of read that, and I've got 2 daughters. I kind of read that saying, as much as a third? Not just a third. I'm reading it going, what? A third still want to do this really weird and archaic thing that speaks directly to sort of patriarchy and the wife being a chattel that is handed over like an oxen or a donkey from the father to the husband. A third still, that's the word I'd use, a third of British women still want to take their partner's surname when they marry. Daily Mail writes it as if it is a disappointment. A third of men aged between 18 to 34 said that they would feel positively about a man taking their spouse's surname. I suppose if you're going to do it one way, then it should be equally logical to do it the other way. But only 27% of Britons of all ages have a positive view of a man doing it. But the Daily Mail mourns this morning that 2 in 3 young women won't take husband's name. 2 in 3 young women won't take husband's name. To which my response is, how is that bad news? The days of a woman being defined by matrimony or being established by matrimony somehow are largely behind us, aren't they? So, I mean, what the question is here is not immediately clear. I don't think we can do a phone-in on why do men... Well, yeah, we can actually. We can do that. It's two-handed, isn't it? It's a double-pronged question. Why is it bad? For people who don't understand why it's bad, I'll have another crack at explaining that myself in a moment, but you possibly can do a better job. You may have thought about it much more than I have. Why is it bad for a woman to take her husband's name? 0345 6060973. And against the backdrop of it being bad, I'm interested in the question of why you would still want to do it. If you're looking forward to taking your husband's name when you marry or you have recently done it, then why do you think it's good? So we'll do a traditional classic for and against on this one, 0345 6060973. I've gone in the space of 25 years from thinking that I cared about it to thinking that it is completely ridiculous. I mean, truly ridiculous. Logistics and paperwork aside, it's a relatively appalling imposition of a form of ownership upon somebody who is supposed to be your partner, isn't it? Isn't it? 0345 6060973. You could maybe have it's just a bit of harmless tradition argument, to which my response would be, so you are perfectly in favour of a man taking his wife's name then, are you? Are you? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Why is it so bad, this practice? And why is it so ridiculous of the Daily Mail to be mourning the increase in autonomy and independence that they seem to see as some sort of disaster. There's a big breakdown between the generations. There always is on this kind of thing. Younger women, the most receptive to all manner of alternatives, going double-barreled or keeping your, what used to be called your maiden name, still is called your maiden name. That's part of the problem. Maiden, I think, is a synonym for virgin, isn't it? I think it is. So it's like your virgin name before you got married. Again, you know, we haven't come that far. You only have to go back to the Edwardians, probably, if not the Victorians. Then that our kind of morality was very different from what it is now, or at least public morality was very different from what it is now. A quarter of younger women would prefer for both husband and wife to keep their original surname. I'm surprised that figure isn't higher. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. And I wonder who the oldest woman is listening who kept her name when it was actually considered to be quite... What does outre mean, Keith? Is that the right word to use in this context? You're nodding very enthusiastically, but there's a blankness in your eyes. When it was considered to be quite radical, when you decided to keep your maiden name because you were an early feminist, if you like, and you recognised the ridiculousness of... wanting your wife to take your name. I mean, my marriage, I think, and I'm going back 25 years now, believe it or not. I know, she deserves a medal. As soon as it was clear that it was not something that Mrs. O'Brien felt the same way as I did about, I feel my passion diminishing. It's up to her what she calls herself. It's not up to me. But I was open and honest about my feelings. But professionally and personally, she was never really known as Mrs. O'Brien. And that's why I can say now, I can't quite believe that I wanted her to be. I really can't. Travelling at the weekend with different names. And I think as they get older, the girls are more likely to introduce or to have both surnames present in their names. There's certainly no particular sense from my daughters that they need to be affiliated or that they need to carry my name exclusively and not their mum's. 12:16 is the time. I'm looking forward to your calls on this. I really am. A couple of you already asking, what do you think about double-barreled names? Well, I will offend you if I tell you. I think they're largely ridiculous. And I don't know why I think that. Okay, so there you go. I've given myself a big pat on the back for having seen the error of my ways 25 years ago, rejecting patriarchal cliche and recognising that you've got as much right to keep your name after we get married as I have to keep mine. But if we merge them both together, I mean, unless you're really lucky and like your name's Tuffington and you marry someone called Buffington, unless you're really lucky and your names lend themselves to a hyphen like a fish lends itself to water, I generally, and this is probably my age, I generally find them a little bit naff. Don't you? I mean, it's toff or naff, and I'm not sure which is worse. Naff or toff, toff or naff. It's almost a phone-in.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 after 12, and here you go. So here's evidence that I have not completely jettisoned my old-fashioned... Is there another word for patriarchal? Is there another... Misogynistic, is it? I hope it's not misogynistic. But I was just a bit rude about double-barreled names, and I've got gay friends who've twinned their names together, and I thought that was lovely. So why would I think it was naff when heterosexual friends have done it? Just trying to remember ones that have and work out whether or not there's any likelihood that they'll be listening to the programme at the moment. So that's me being a little bit patriarchal, thinking, oh, it's okay when the fellas do it. It's all right when the lads do it. But not when the lads and the ladies do it together. 12:19 is the time. Jane's in Weymouth. Jane, what would you like to say?
Morning. Afternoon, James.
Yes, it's the morning somewhere, Jane.
Yes. I was a student of the 70s, second-wave feminist, and never, ever, ever thought I would should ever change my name, partly because I thought it meant I belonged to somebody else.
Yes,
and
well, it did. It did used to mean that. It did used to mean that.
And lots of my friends who are either in relationships from those times, they didn't change their names either. But what struck me is I have an adult daughter now, and most of her friends who are married have changed their names, which I think is extraordinary.
Yes.
But when she got married, they had such long discussions, not arguments, but discussions. And her husband ended up taking her name. not his.
Is it a nicer name? Is it a nicer name?
No, there's no real difference to either name. And
I think if I'd married a woman called Storm, I would have wanted to I always wanted to be known as Jake Storm when I was growing up.
Brilliant.
Doesn't that? I think it might be an Adrian Mole thing. I think he maybe had a hero in one of his unpublished novels that was called Jake Storm. But if you had what is a really cool surname? I don't know, but it wasn't that. So they decided. So how did that come about? If you don't mind me prying, did he want them both to have the same name?
Yes, because he knew that she didn't have the same name as me.
Right.
Because my children took their father's name.
Sure.
But and that actually has caused a lot of debate since. So why did I let the kids take his name and not insist that they took my name?
Yeah, well, you could have gone double barrel.
I don't have an answer to that.
No?
Oh, God, no. If you knew my name, you would know that we could not have gone double barreled.
So I like this. So the couple getting married, your daughter, she was adamant she wasn't going to take her new husband's name, and he felt very strongly that they both had the same name. So the obvious compromise was for them to both take her name.
Yes, and that's exactly what they did. I will say that before they got to that, they tried to make, what would you call it, amalgamations of the two names, not double-barreled.
Right.
But if they'd been called Brown and Smith, they were called Bro Smith or Smibro or something.
Can you do that? Can you invent a new name? What did you have to go to deed poll and stuff to do that?
Well, they would have had to go to deed poll.
Yeah.
I mean, it got that serious.
Gosh. So it's still a big deal. It's still a big thing. It's just that there's a multiplicity of opinions. Can I ask what your mum thought about it when you kept your name? Was she still with us?
Horrified.
I knew it.
Horrified.
I should have put some money on that. I knew that she would, because that was a generational aberration.
Absolutely. And I have friends of a lot older than me who do not understand why I don't have the same name. And it's funny, actually, when my husband gets letters addressed to Mr. and his Christian name, but my surname, because people only know me. So we get invited to things like, to Mr. and Mrs., and they assume he's got the same name as me.
Yes, I guess society is still skewed in that way, isn't it? And sometimes it'll be computer software and what have you, but I like that. I think that's a really interesting triple generational journey from grandma, who obviously took your dad's name, horrified when you decided not to take your husband's name, and then granddaughter, I just sort of bookending you, marrying a man who took her name. It's all there, apart from the double barrel, which there are obviously very good reasons for. I like this, and well done for putting your name at the top, because I very nearly did read it out. For putting at the top, please withhold my name. I initially was happy to take my husband's name on marriage, but with all the official paperwork requirements, it made me feel that I had lost who I was. Becoming pregnant pretty soon after marriage, which was happily planned, the side effect of how society was then, I felt I had become totally invisible as I pushed the pram. That is an incredibly poignant message, person who will not be named, because it really resonates with me, and I think it really speaks to the seriousness of a subject that Jane recognised, and I hope I recognised, but which some people may miss. Oh, what's the big deal? Personal identity is the big deal. You have been known by this name all your life. I like the pledging of the troth. I like the public commitment of commitment. But why it involves anybody changing their name, I do not know. I love that line there. And I'm so sorry that you felt that way. But I completely understand it. You've really managed to get under my wire there. I must actually just delete your message, otherwise I'm going to say your name. Thank you. 25 after 12. Kerry's in Great Dunmow. Kerry, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I am 35 years old, just for context in terms of generational.
Yes.
I've always felt very strongly, even from quite a young age, I think, that I thought if I was to marry in the future that I would not take the man's name. I felt very strongly that, exactly what you just said, it's my identity. Yeah. Why would I want to lose that? Why would I want to become somebody else? So that was kind of the base of it. As it's come to fruition now, there's a couple of more practical practical points, I think.
Yes.
I have my father's name. My parents weren't married, in fact, but my mum was happy for me to have my father's name.
Okay.
All of my father's brothers have daughters.
Right.
And so what you were saying about you perhaps losing the O'Brien name, if we were all to marry and take our husband's names, then our family name would have died out.
Yes.
So that was one point. And the second point really...
Well, except it wouldn't have done, would it? Because I mentioned I was in Ireland at the weekend. It's very hard to be called O'Brien and to spend a weekend in Ireland thinking,
Yes,
my
we're
name's
not the
about
only
to
one.
die out. It goes off licenses, pubs, restaurants, estate agents, bloody O'Briens everywhere.
True. That was very egotistical of me to think that I'm the one carrying that whole name.
Yes.
But just in a very personal sense.
Of course. And it's your line. It's your line of that name, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we have a daughter now. She's 9 months old, and we actually decided to give her a double-barreled name of both of our names.
Yes.
My husband was very on board with that.
And is it hyphenate? I don't know why this matters.
Yeah.
And you have gone for the hyphen.
We have, and
That's
I have
nice.
to say, James, I'm from a very working class background, so I never thought I'd have a child with a double barrel.
I've got images of Les Dawson and Roy Barraclough. You're too young to remember their kid. They did two old ladies over the garden fence, and they'd be saying about you, Kerry, she's gone and got herself a hyphen. She's only gone and got herself a hyphen. Who does she think she is with a hyphen? Honestly.
Exactly that. The last thing I would say about it, if you don't mind, is that I'm a solicitor. And so I feel very strongly as well that I trained very hard to get the job that I have and become known to some extent in the professional world, and then to have lost that. To suddenly
exactly that in journalism as well, where your byline is your calling card. And I was always very surprised, taken aback by, and I think it was exclusively women. There may have been a couple of men, but when my generation changed their professional name. And if you're not changing your professional name, then you're not really changing your personal name either. It's staying the same. But you're right. You've worked hard to achieve a reputation. And all right, you might only spend a year saying, "No, I used to be James Smith, and now I'm James O'Brien. I used to be Kerry whatever, and now I'm Kerry whatever." But it is a year that you shouldn't. A man never has to do that. It's coming up to 12:29, and that I think I'm going to have to apologise for my double barrel comments, aren't I? Because of course, if it's a child that is combining both names, it's quite lovely. And again, I've got this, what would you call it, heterophobia, where my gay friends have done it, I thought it was lovely, and yet when my straight friends have done it, I thought, why have you done that then? But the answer's obvious. It's the best of both worlds. What happens, though... Oh, hang on. Kerry, come back a minute.
I'm here.
You're still there. What happens if your daughter falls in love with someone whose parents have done the same thing that you've done?
I thought the same. They might end up with 4. No, they have to pick the best, and then I'll convince them.
Yeah, well, that's it. They can pick and choose. You can have one from mine and one from the other. I'll have 4 from the top and 2 from the bottom, please, Carol. It's 12:29. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're discussing social change, but so far from a simultaneously frivolous and serious perspective. I think that the presence of the word patriarchy in this conversation is absolutely essential, but so are the words personal choice. And I am a little bit confused, to the point perhaps of disapproving, of women who still want to take their husband's name, but much more so of men who really want their wife to take their name. And I can be really disapproving of those men because I used to be one, and I now see very, very, very clearly the error of my ways, partly because of the callers we've heard, and partly because of that message talking about feeling your own identity disappearing, and partly because of the great point we just heard about professional achievement, which, like it or not, is a much bigger factor in the lives of younger women than it was in the lives of their grandmothers and even perhaps their mothers. It is 12:30. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I love this, actually, from a friend of mine, but she's posted it on Blue Sky, so I don't think I'm betraying any secrets here. And it is one of the best names in the British media. Lucrezia Millarini, the ITV newscaster, says, "I never ever considered changing my name when I got married, and yet my mother-in-law insists on sending mail using my husband's surname," which she describes, I think, quite correctly as old school trolling. That's why I asked Jane about how her mum thought about it. I think probably, if push came to shove, my mum would very much have felt that my wife should do what she did when she got married. That's what we generally do, isn't it? We don't like being made to think that possibly what we did was wrong. You don't have to think about it too deeply, but why would you change it? We've always done things like that. But that first caller, Jane, said, because I didn't want to feel like I was owned by someone. And that is the message that historically the change of name sends to society. 12:34 is the time. I like this from Jonathan. Could your children possibly be looking at you with an expression tinged with the impatience of the next generation? That's what I was just trying to touch on there. Just it cuts both ways. So the older generation look a little askance at changes, at modernity. The younger generation are looking in the opposite direction and thinking, why do you do things like that? Why didn't everybody go double-barreled? Or why did anybody ever take their husband's name when they got married? And he goes on, my nephew in Denmark took his wife's surname last year. And I thought that was odd, but on reflection, there isn't any reason why he shouldn't. And that is what I hope this show achieves. You take that initial impulse, which is negative, well, that's a bit odd, or I don't like that, or I'm scared of that, or I'm angry about that, and then you think about it and you realise, I really shouldn't be feeling the way that I'm feeling about this. 12:35 is the time. Sophie's in Burgess Hill. Sophie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I'm
Sophie.
36. I got married 10 years ago, and I took my husband's name. If I got married today, I wouldn't have taken his name.
Why not?
Because it's my name.
Yes.
And I didn't value its importance back then like I do now.
Gosh.
I'm a very strong-minded, independent woman. I love my husband. I wouldn't change the fact that I'm married to him at all. We have a fantastic relationship. He supports me in all of my endeavours, in all of my voices that I choose to take on board.
I understand.
But I didn't want to rock the boat any more than I already do.
You mean socially rather than familiarly? You just mean in the context of tradition and, quotes, normality, end quotes?
Exactly. I already have very strong opinions about how I raise my children, how I feel about society.
Sure.
I'm already incredibly vocal, and I just thought, you know what, I don't know if anybody else if people are going to tolerate any other opinion that I seem to have that's different to everybody else's.
When you say people, do you mean, are we thinking of your in-laws at all at this point?
No, they're lovely. I think I was thinking more extended than that.
Okay.
My grandparents, perhaps, who bless their hearts aren't with us anymore. My husband's extended family. I didn't want to insult him. I didn't want anybody to. I don't know. It seems a bit silly, and my husband's probably listening to this at work right now. And I absolutely love him to bits. And
don't worry, you've established that, Sophie. There's no need to keep labouring that point. He knows. He knows. It's clear. It's clear. And did he have views on it? Did you have a conversation about it, or did you literally just tick the box? Just went down the "this is normal" road.
I just thought, gosh, there's so much going on. There's so much that we're planning, and there's so much to deal with that I'm just going to shelve that for the moment. And it was at the back of my mind. And I think when I got married, the wedding plans were different to what I would do now. I listened to lots of other people's opinions about what a wedding should be like and who you should invite and what you should be doing. Yes. And I generally didn't stop to think, do you know what do we want?
Well, who paid for it?
A mixture.
Yeah, because that is also relevant, because you sort of find yourself inviting more of your parents' friends than your own friends, but that might have a lot to do with who's actually picking up the bill. And is it too late now? You couldn't sort of, I mean, you didn't keep it in some context, didn't keep it at work, but not keep it at home or anything like that. You went all in.
I went all in. I mean, the only reason I think about it more now is because we have two young children. And you explain the world to them as they grow up, don't you?
Yes, you do indeed.
You go through the different aspects of life, and they ask, why is this like this, and why is this like that? And I'm getting to that point where these questions are being answered.
You can't tell them.
I can't tell them.
I'm the same, though. When mine say to him, why did you want Mum to take your name, you weirdo? And I have to say, I honestly don't know, darling. It was. I mean, I'd like Sophie, like you. It was just what was done, and I felt like a bigger pledge of commitment. I don't know why, but I did, and now I don't. So I'm the same as you, albeit from the other side of the issue.
There are lots of reasons why I try to show my children that mum and dad are equals, and we do that very well within the household.
Yes.
But then you watch programs on TV like this Adolescence, and I'm trying to distill to my son, who's 6 years old, that mum is as important and women are as important.
Wow.
And me having his name doesn't quite transmit that message to me.
Ah, wow. I hear you. I mean, you're clearly going to do a cracking job of conveying the message anyway, but it does have an echo of patriarchy, and patriarchy involves either, at the very least, the kind of subjugation or inferiority of women, and the idea that men have dominion over them. And as with all the things I talked about at the top of this hour, these are some of these battles are battles that we thought had been won, but then, up pop the likes of Donald Trump and other elements of the far right, who often have, as part of their so-called ideology, they will often have subjugation of women. And you can see it in the so-called trad wife movement, of which I would say not taking your husband's name when you get married is the polar opposite social position. Sophie, thank you. I don't sound patronising, but don't beat yourself up. I mean, it's a relatively easy obstacle to get over when you're explaining it to your children. I have found, and I'm doing it from the point of view of being the silly sausage who thought it was important. Teresa is in Dorchester. Teresa, what would you like to say?
Just echoing, James, a lot of what your previous callers have said. I got married over 35 years ago, and I kept my surname, and I suppose it was just because I couldn't see any reason why I wouldn't keep my surname.
Which was a less common position at that time, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And, my mum, being an Irish Catholic mum, was absolutely petrified that my children would be seen as being illegitimate.
Oh, gosh, of course. Well, that's part of it. We've missed that element of it, haven't we?
Yeah. And the other thing as well, I said to your producer that for me, my bugbear is the Miss, Mrs, Ms, that as females we have to go through. I never, when I got married, I absolutely insist that I just used MS. Yes. So I've never, ever, and as my daughters, I really, really always try and encourage them never to use the Miss and Mrs. Because why does it matter? Men are always Mr.
Well, it was code to tell society whether or not you were available or not, I suppose.
Exactly.
Wasn't it?
Exactly.
Which is, again, pretty grim.
It is.
Because it means your value, your identity is determined only by your sexual availability almost, or your marital availability to a man.
Exactly. But even now, I'm still constantly asked, when you get up, when you're doing car insurance, whether you're doing anything, are you Miss, Mrs, Mr, and as I say, it's very, very, it's wrong.
No, I get it. And the problem is, I think we're all being very nice today, but you don't want to feel as if you're putting the boot into people who have made the decision to go the other way. Sophie, the main representative so far of that position, and she regrets her decision, but you don't really want someone who's sitting there today, recently married, listening to this, relishing in the new name and the new married bliss, to feel judged or condescended to or looked down on. But I guess, then you're going to have to answer the question of why didn't he take your name? Why did you have to do it that way round? A lot of jokers out there today. I've got David, who wishes he'd taken his wife's name because then he would have been David Niven. I've got Gary, Gary Burton, who still hasn't forgiven his mum for not calling him Richard. But I guess we'll have to do this one from Matt, who's in Stockport. Your surname discussion reminds me of an old joke from the Solent area. If Isla Blair married Barry White and changed her name, she'd have become Isla White, which is true. And then when Barry died, had she married Brian Ferry but decided to keep both names in order to honour her late husband, she'd have become the Isla White Ferry. That's quite good. I quite like that. But there are quite a few variations on this gag that you are sharing me, which I have to check. Yeah, okay, so this one's fine. Imagine if, because you're going to try and smuggle something filthy past me and you'll get me to read it out on the radio and then you'll all start laughing at me and I'll get into trouble with Ofcom. So I have to double check I'm not being tempted into saying something fruity. I think this one is all right. Imagine if the Dutch footballer Denzel Dumfries were married to the former MP George Galloway's daughter and that they went double-barrelled. Well, they'd need an anand, wouldn't they, rather than an ampersand rather than a hyphen. It'd be Dumfries and Galloway. I like that. That's strong. It's another Teresa. Look at that, 2 Teresas. And we've got... Oh, hang on. I'll let Teresa tell her story first, and then I'll read a couple of the texts inspired by the trolling mother-in-law. Teresa in Rutland, what would you like to say?
So I'm turning 60 next month.
Congratulations.
Married, thank you very much. Married nearly 4 years.
Yeah.
Never even entered my head to change my name.
No.
I had a career, everything was going really well. So husband would have liked me to have had his name, but totally accepted it.
And did that dissipate? I mean, 5 years later, would he have been like, I don't know why I cared?
He did, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
he just
same here.
However, my mother-in-law, to this day, still has a problem with it.
Oh, no, really?
Oh, yeah. If she can get a niggle in about me not changing my name, she will.
She's had 40 years to get used to it.
Doesn't matter.
No, you're right. It doesn't matter. And could we put into words why? I mean, there's two elements to this. One I can see clearly, which is the kind of implicit criticism people feel when younger people do something differently. I think all parents sometimes think, well, that means that you think I'm an idiot for doing what I did. But is there anything else to it?
No, just more of a controlling. She had a very set expectations of how people should live, how you get married, how you have to do certain things. And the fact that we totally ignored her...
subversive, Teresa.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
You see, whatever next. If you're not going to take his name, you'll be burning your bra next or going to Greenham Common or something like that.
I brought my son up to be a feminist, so
Good.
yeah, I carried on the tradition.
I love it. Of course, your husband's surname wasn't Green, was it?
No, it wasn't.
No, all right, sorry. Just checking, Teresa. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
All the jokes now. So it's a very serious grown-up radio show, this. If Whoopi Goldberg married Peter Cushing and decided to take his name, about 30 people have sent me that joke. It's an interesting one, actually. And I don't know that the man taking the wife's name is an antidote to the sort of patriarchal tradition. I'm not quite sure, but I did promise you, even before 10 o'clock this morning, when I was doing that little talk-up at the end of Nick's time, before the 10 o'clock news, I told you that there was a danger that the unhinged headline feature had been broken today because of a headline so unhinged that it perhaps means we can't go back there again. We will, I'm sure, but I doubt we'll ever scale heights quite as dizzy as the ones we're about to scale. And I need to thank Peter, not Peter Cushing, for reminding me unintentionally that I hadn't shared with you today's unhinged headline, because Peter sent me the most unhinged text that I've received in a very long time. And it was while reading that I remembered I hadn't done the unhinged headline. Would you like to hear the unhinged text from Peter? He writes, "Why are you so determined to change everything God has put in place? God is the head. Man represents God as head of house. Then female is next. Head followed by the children. With God there is an order. It's not anything goes." You missed out the apostrophe there, Peter, on it's, which I think is pretty close to blasphemous in the context of grammar pedants. And he finishes, "That's the satanic way that you guys are pushing." Can we get that as a jingle or as an advert? Can we get James O'Brien pushing the satanic way since 2005? And anyway, I have, as promised, got you a headline now that's almost as unhinged as Peter's text.
Unhinged headline.
Oh, that sounds good. It's Liz Truss. Who would publish anything by Liz Truss? All together now? Daily Telegraph. She's too nuts even for the Mail. Headline, and it's on the online bit. It's not the headline that they used in the actual newspaper. You ready for this? Trump has been proven right about pretty much everything. I'll say that again. Trump has been proven right about pretty much everything. I often suggest to you that some issues have ceased to be political and become psychological. And Donald Trump, as we've established, is very much in that category. So as he continues to, rinse the media, rinse the educational establishment, rinse the judiciary, threatens to deport actual Americans to foreign gulags, refuses to try to bring back a man who's been deported to El Salvador by accident. Just the evidence upon evidence upon evidence, the tariffs, which made Liz Truss look briefly like the second most ill-advised economic policy of the last 10 years, last 20 years, last 50 years. I don't know how. I don't know what the payoff is. Does she get a gig now on these weird speaking circuits that Farage is on? I just don't know what it is, but there you go. And the other thing she does is claim that the last 20 years and beyond have been disastrous for the United Kingdom, where I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think if you go back to 2010, she spent more time in the cabinet between 2010 and 2024 than any other Tory. And yet, it's all about how dreadful everything was for the period of time in which she spent more time in the cabinet than any other politician. But anyway, that is why I was a little worried that we might have reached the end of the road regarding
Unhinged Headline.
But we'll be back. We'll be back. David's in Yeovil. David, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, David.
Just to put a little perspective on changing your name, I took my wife's name 19 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, unusual, I guess, but, you know, there were good reasons why I did that. But since then, on a number of occasions, what I have noticed, when it's come up in conversation, you know, oh, God, you've not always been called that. No, okay. Well, you know, so why did you change your name?
Yeah.
You know, well, people look at you with suspicion, you know, that you know, you've changed your name because you want to hide your identity.
You're trying to escape from your criminal past. I had to change my name. It was witness protection or something like that. But what were the good reasons? Why did you, if you don't mind me asking?
It's a lot more mundane than that, really. Basically, my prospective wife had recently got divorced and went back to her original maiden name.
Yes.
And I didn't want my prospective new wife to have the same name as my ex-wife.
Right.
Because I didn't want there to be any confusion in my head or anybody else's. You know, I didn't want anybody muddling.
So your
the two
ex-wife
up.
kept your name after you divorced?
Well, no.
Or there was a chance she was going to, or you didn't. Even if she didn't, you didn't want them. They didn't have the same first name, did they, David?
No.
Because that would explain your position even more strongly, wouldn't it? Is that you just swap one out for?
Yeah, and it just seemed to me to be, you know, well, it would have been awful, you know, for me to be for my new wife to take.
I like that's
name.
really thoughtful of you. And were there any difficulties, I mean, professionally, to suddenly start going by a new name, or did you split yourself? Did you go by a new name personally and stick to the old name professionally, or
no? I
just
completely transformed everything. Yeah. And
what about all your monogrammed handkerchiefs, David?
Yeah.
I couldn't do this. I've got my monogrammed slippers at home. What am I going to do with those? So I got a new name.
Yeah. I mean, but it still comes up now.
I bet it does. Well, it is odd. It's odd. I mean, you're odd in just the sense as against the common herd, in the same way that the older women who decided to keep their name against much resistance, or when it was not normal or accepted. I like that. That's a really good reminder, if anybody needed it, that it is a little bit silly to start prescribing on this issue about what is right and what is wrong, because in the modern world there are so many different variations and flavours of family and marriage. And I loved I think it was from Lynn, I've deleted it for some reason, talking about how her mother-in-law still uses the married name and both aunts-in-law as well, still using the married name when communicating birthday cards, Christmas cards, when she never ever uses it, hasn't used it in decades of marriage. But mums, I guess, particularly perhaps mums of boys, would feel that there was some sort of affront involved in not taking the name. I don't know. Thank you, David. Rebecca is in Peterborough. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm a little bit nervous.
It's only me. It's only me.
I'm 35 for context, and I got married about a year and a half ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We've been together quite a long time, but just got married a year and a half ago. And I fully intend to take his surname. The paperwork's kind of put me off so far. I keep pushing it further back, but I do want to, and I can't explain why. There isn't really a reason. I just kind of would like us to have the same name,
but not yours.
Yeah, I did ask him before we got married. I said, would you change your name? And he didn't really want to, which I don't have an issue with, because he also doesn't feel that I should change my name. It's very much my
Okay, you
my
want
choice.
to. So it's a bit like what you're presenting to the world as a unit. Is that it, sort of, or not?
I think so, yeah. But the reason I think as well it's taken me so long is I'm being a bit awkward about mine, so I'll have to go through deed poll because I want to keep my maiden name, but I can't double barrel. I'm from the northeast. I'm working class. It's just in my mind.
We're back to Les Dawson and Rose. She's got a hyphen.
It's
that Rebecca, she's only gone and got herself a hyphen. I can't believe it. Some people, honestly, airs and graces and hyphens.
I have no issue with it for other people, but I just think, it's not for me.
So what do you have to do? I can't...
Well, because I want to put my maiden name as an additional middle name.
Oh, okay.
So to do that, it has to go through deed poll, because I don't want to get rid of it, but...
No, I get it, but you don't want to be known by it anymore either. And will it have any professional repercussions? Do you have to sort of...
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a musician, so a lot of it's built on kind of...
I nearly made a joke then.
Reputation.
I nearly made a joke then about how if you've got 5 best-selling albums under one name and you're going to release the next one under a new name, you're going to lose a lot of your followers. I had no idea you were a musician.
Well, I wish, but...
Yeah, sure, of course. Right, you're still young, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, so professionally speaking, I still go by my maiden name.
And you kind of have to, because people want to buy a ticket to an artist that they recognise.
Yeah, or even just, contacts that in the industry, people that I've known for a long time. They won't think to call that new surname because they have no context of who that is. It's quite similar, I imagine, to a journalist.
Yes, exactly that. I think exactly that, a byline. I love that, Rebecca. Thank you. I think we've covered almost everything there, with old David in Taunton especially bringing in a really unique perspective. I really enjoyed that conversation. Maybe we should spend a little bit more time in the shallow end than we do, instead of just at 12 o'clock on Fridays. It is coming up to 12:59. If you missed any of today... Actually, it wasn't the shallow end, was it, in the end? It was actually quite a serious conversation about all manner of issues, but without much prospect of any of us having a scrap. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. I've done this in the style of the bloke on the Aer Lingus flight back from Dublin yesterday, who was reading through the terms and conditions of... at a speed absolutely breakneck speed. So I thought this is a little tribute to him. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Sawbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
You should listen to the now sadly late Micheál O'Hare commentating on horse racing.
Yes.
Never beaten.
High
speed.
I think I'm familiar with his work. I think Henry Riley could have a go at commentating.
Yes, he could.
He could. Don't you think?
I do. That's a very good spot.
I've had this conversation with him a few times, but he's so far not interested.
Yeah, he's got a voice that needs a lip mic all the time.
Hasn't he just? It's so true. Go on.
James O'Brien on LBC.